Chapter 391. Hellion Vivian didn't know what he wanted to do. The feeling of being trapped in his arms always made her feel unsafe. She just blurted out 5 words. The hot spring behind the mountain. You want to use the water to lower your temperature? Do you think that the day of dual cultivation is the same as being drugged? Can you solve it by just soaking in water? Baligaju looked at the small face in front of him and wondered how he fell in love with such a bad-tempered girl. Not only was her face dark, but she also didn't take him seriously. Thinking of this, Baligaju pinched her waist hard. He only felt that the skin under his palm was delicate and smooth. He couldn't help but touch it a few more times. The corners of his mouth curled up without him noticing. Hellion Vivian trembled and her waist and eyes went soft, but he seemed to be in the mood. He looked like he was teaching a disobedient subordinate. His fingers slid under her clothes. There was a slight friction between the skin and the itch slowly penetrated into the pores. He slowly raised his eyebrows. You are afraid? Hellion Vivian trembled and turned her head to the side. She seemed to smile. Afraid? What's there to be afraid of? You know what I'm talking about. Baligaju's thin lips slid over her neck. Since you just came in, your body hasn't relaxed. Are you afraid that I will suddenly want you? Or are you afraid that you will pounce on me and beg me to do you? Hellion Vivian was stimulated by his words and her body temperature became hotter. As they rubbed against each other, her body twisted. She hung on Baligaju's body and sat in Baligaju's arms. When she twisted around, she inevitably touched some parts that she shouldn't touch. So she could only hold on tightly to his clothes. But Hellion Vivian didn't expect that she looked weak and helpless like this, which made people want to destroy her. Especially when she pulled open her collar due to the struggle, revealing her fair skin and black collar. Her beautiful deep collarbone looked seductive, and even the corners of her eyes were slightly pink. Baligaju's eyes darkened. He kissed her directly on the side of her ear and smiled enchantingly. Obviously, your body needs me more than soaking in the water. Hellion Vivian didn't know why her breathing became rapid. She felt that the surrounding temperature was a little too high, and even her back was a little hot. She wanted to avoid him, but Baligaju's lips stuck to her skin without any hindrance. Hellion Vivian felt all the pores on her body explode. Her mouth was so dry that she couldn't even spit out a single word for a moment. A thick and unique aura had filled the entire room at some point in time, urging on something. It was like the song of a siren. When people heard that charming voice, they had already fallen into the abyss. Hellion Vivian couldn't stand it anymore. She pulled Baligaju down and climbed up like a vine. She clung to him tightly and let out a silent sigh of comfort. There was a layer of water in her originally pale eyes. Baligaju, who was teased, seemed to have finally come back to his senses. He suddenly grabbed Hellion Vivian's waist with one hand, and his palm reached into her clothes to grope unscrupulously. He pinched her chin and lifted it up. Do you want it? Under the weak light, Hellion Vivian's face was red, and her eyes were like overflowing spring water. She couldn't hear what he was saying. Baligaju kissed her fiercely. Hellion Vivian softly leaned in his arms and slightly raised her head. Her lips and tongue responded shakily, and the kiss became lingering. One side plundered to their heart's content, while the other side took and asked. The ambiguous sound made people blush and their hearts beat faster. But they seemed to be unaware of it. Some feelings that couldn't be expressed when they were awake flowed into each other's hearts. And Hellion Vivian had never been so docile. She let Baligaju plunder her body, but she still felt that it was far from enough. She just wanted to bury herself deeper in the man's arms. Her long legs couldn't help but rub again and again, like a silent and shy invitation. Baligaju's breathing became heavier, but his eyes were clearer than ever. Tell me, who is the young Master Tang you are talking about? As long as you tell me, I will give it to you. This name was like a sobering agent implanted in Hellion Vivian's brain. It was only for a moment. There is no such person. Hellion Vivian's eyes were cold. She grabbed her wrist and twisted it hard. Kacha, a soft sound was heard. Baligaju's whole body trembled. He reached out and pulled her over. What are you doing? Hellion Vivian gathered some reason and strength from the pain. She pushed away Baligaju, who was unprepared, and staggered back with the help of the reaction force. Her waist bumped into the sharp corner of the table. She groaned, but the corners of her mouth curved up. Helian Weiwei's mind was filled with scattered fragments of memories. She only knew that when she fell into a deep sleep, she still maintained her original nature, and did not reveal that she was the one who had taken over her body, so that the other party would not treat her as a monster and loathe her. That was enough. The moonlight shone through the wooden window and shone on Beligaju's pale face. Those who didn't know would think that the injured person wasn't Helian Vivian lying on the bed, but him. Bailey Jiaju had never thought that she would resort to self-mutilation to reject his question. Just because of that, young Master Tang? He had never felt so empty like this before. It seemed that no matter what he did, he couldn't hold the person in front of him. That was because she had too many secrets. She didn't want him to know every single one of them. Beligaju got up and put one hand in his pocket. He arrogantly looked at the night outside the window. His long black hair set off his perfect ice-cold face. He was as elegant and indifferent as usual, but his fingers were clenched tighter and tighter. Fire Qilan's figure was faintly visible behind him. It looked at Helian Vivian in surprise. There was actually such a tenacious human in this world. Master had already released his psychedelic aura. She could still resist the temptation before the full moon. One had to know that Master had never done this before. Because releasing the psychedelic aura was not suitable for Master right now. Using his own aura to affect the other's aura would consume a lot of energy. But what it didn't expect was that Master would go to this extent for a human. It's probably because Master also sensed that within Weiwei's body, there was something unstable causing mischief. That's why he used up his own cultivation to help her suppress it. The night was getting darker and darker. The injured Helian Vivian's dream was gloomy. The real Helian Vivian looked at her with eyes full of tears. It was as if she was blaming her for taking away everything that belonged to her. This time someone reached out and seemed to want to drag her to the bottom of the lake. Helian Vivian struggled with all her might to stand up. She felt as if her body was surrounded by an unknown aura. That was why she was able to survive. But the lake in her dream was too deep. It was so deep that when she woke up, she felt cold all over. Chapter 392. Because of the dream, Helian Weiwei's eyebrows were knitted together. Her black hair was wet with sweat and stuck to her forehead. Of course, Bailey Jiaju was also aware of this kind of movement. He held her firmly in his arms and kissed her domineeringly, with a sense of punishment as if he was venting his anger. Helian Vivian let out a muffled cry of pain, but he took advantage of the opening to bite her lips. He seemed to be really angry. Helian Vivian vaguely thought about how the royal family was going to punish her this time. She heard him whisper in her ear, "If you hurt yourself again, I'll take advantage of you when you're unconscious." There was actually a hint of hoarseness in his voice, as if he couldn't get what he wanted. Helian Vivian didn't dare to look at Beligaju's face. Her broken left hand had been fixed in advance. She only tilted her head and wiped the remaining silver strands on the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. She used so much strength that her skin turned red. "Don't wipe anymore." Beligaju pressed her hand down. The corner of his mouth was a little bitter. Did she dislike his kiss that much? Resentment, jealousy, grievance, and other conflicting feelings spiraled and grew stronger, hitting his chest until it was a little dull. Helian Vivian nodded. She was still a little confused. She didn't understand how she and Beligaju had come to this point. Just as her thoughts were running wild, Helian Vivian heard Beligaju take a deep breath. His long and beautiful eyes opened and his voice was deep. "If you don't want to sleep, then let's do something else." That voice was sexy and hoarse. Helian Vivian only felt a little numb in her ears. She didn't need to think to know what something else was. She covered her head with the quilt and slept very obediently. She didn't want to let him touch her. Beligaju gritted his teeth as he looked at that lazy figure. He was so jealous that he almost bubbled. He almost blurted out a question, but in an instant, he saw Helian Vivian's expression. Her thin lips were pursed and her face was slightly red. She seemed to be a little nervous. Heh, how rare. Even a cunning fox would be nervous. The two of them slept on the same bed. He held her in his arms and rested his chin on the top of her head, but his eyes were full of coldness. When Helian Vivian woke up, the space beside her was already empty, leaving only the dampness of the quilt. She was stunned at first, then she called Qing Zhan over. She heard someone say that His Highness probably went back to the palace to prepare for the selection of the secondary consort. She felt lucky that Beligaju asked him about that person's name yesterday. No one knew that everyone in the Tang sect had gone through a lot of training before joining the Tang sect. Once someone tried to get information about young Master Tang, they would be able to find out who he was. Their bodies would react in the most basic way. Of course, for Hellion Vivian, even if there was no such training, she wouldn't say that person's name either, because in the 21st century, he was the only person she wanted to protect. However, what happened yesterday? Hellion Vivian asked Yuan Ming. Didn't you say that there would only be a reaction on the night of the full moon? Yuan Ming laughed evilly. There was a change in the qi. That man had a scent that would make the demon cultivator obsessed. So we still have to isolate him. Hellion Vivian reached out and pressed her aching forehead. Yuan Ming suddenly stood up straight. Something's wrong. What? As soon as Hellion Vivian finished speaking, she heard an ear-piercing scream from the superior compound. The scream was very unusual. Through the sound of the rain, it seemed to have an indescribable fear. Murder, murder. Someone had indeed died, and the way she died was very strange. All the blood in her body had evaporated in an extremely strange way. Her whole body appeared to be sunken and shriveled. You could even see the few bones left after removing the blood. Hellion Vivian frowned as she looked at the corpse in front of her. A lot of doubts gradually emerged in her heart. However, her reason didn't let her show the slightest bit of inappropriateness. Her pair of eyes only deepened as she quickly analyzed. The victim's age was 17 to 19 years old. She died from a large amount of blood loss. The time of death was between 9 and 1 o'clock yesterday. There were no obvious signs of injury on the surface of the body. The body was in good condition. The fine and soft things were enough to rule out the possibility of murder. It was just that the way this corpse died was too strange. Intuition made people feel uncomfortable in their hearts. The murder happened at White Academy, which was still some distance away from the capital. The people from the Yamen couldn't have come immediately. Hellion Vivian obtained almost all the information from the scene of the first murder. The person who had died was the young miss of the Bai family, who had a good family background. Her appearance was also decent. During this period of time, she had been practicing the zither in her room. According to the servant girl, she wanted to participate in the upcoming selection in the capital, so she practiced the zither with all her might, wanting to stand out in the selection. When the servant girl was talking, she was crying all the time. Hellion Vivian took advantage of this time and walked around the entire room. The strange thing was that the doors and windows were all locked from the inside. There was no trace of being opened. Even the floor was clean. There were no traces of fighting. Except for the dead person lying on the floor, everything was very normal. This case was really strange. At the beginning, she suspected that it must be a fierce master, so it could be so straightforward. But until she remembered that it was raining outside last night, she felt that her idea was wrong. The martial qi of the royal family was already very high, but even if they went out, it was inevitable that they would be contaminated with the humidity outside. Even now it was the same. It was still raining outside. No matter who entered the room, there should be traces on the floor. Unless the murderer didn't come in from outside. This murder case looked simple, but in fact it was very complicated. It was very obvious that this was a tricky case of murder in a locked room. Hellion Vivian did not handle many cases, but she knew that among all the murder cases, murder in a locked room was the most troublesome. However, this case fell on the head of the battle spirit forces. This has not happened in the White Academy for more than 100 years. Tu Sufeng glanced at the 4 new members standing opposite him, which included Hellion Vivian, Yun Biluo, Shao Qi, and Han Yu. The people from the Yamen will come up the mountain soon, Tu Sufeng said in a low voice. I'm very familiar with their methods. When they find the traces, the whole academy will be in chaos. Han Yu's eyes flashed. Dean, you mean that you think there will be more murders? It's very possible. Tu Sufeng's eyes darkened. In order to prevent more people from being killed, you must find the murderer as soon as possible. Also, you can't reveal your identities. Yes. The reply in unison echoed in the underground palace. Hellion Weiwei furrowed her brows. Chapter 393. I feel that this is not an ordinary murder case. Coming out of the underground palace, Yuan Ming's tone was a lot heavier. Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks. What do you mean? Do you still remember the fog we saw at Green Dragon Lake last night? Yuan Ming lowered his voice and said, those are all produced from the intertwining of resentment. What the other party wants to do is to destroy the auspicious aura of the White Academy. However, the auspicious aura is not that easy to destroy, unless the other party is able to produce enough resentment in a short period of time. It is very obvious that today's murder case is only the beginning. Following this, there will be more people who will be harmed. As Yuan Ming was speaking, the magistrate arrived in a grandiose manner. Seeing the students of the superior compound, he bowed and bowed. But once he saw the corpse, he was somewhat unhappy. Originally, he was in charge of White Academy's security issues, and the higher-ups would always look for him to talk from time to time. Now that there was a murder case here, he just wanted to clean up this place as soon as possible and suppress the murder case as much as possible. However, it was very obvious that the magistrate's calculations were wrong. A murder case occurred in their own residence. How could the students not care? Each of them had a different expression and asked the magistrate to give them an explanation. How could the magistrate offend the students of the superior compound? So he said to the coroner, since everyone wants to know, you tell them what you found. Yes. The coroner cupped his hands and walked over. It was only a group of students who did not have common sense, so it was not easy to fool them. He smiled a bit, with a bit of arrogance. The deceased's age was between 17 and 19 years old. He died from excessive blood loss. The time of death was between 9 and 1 o'clock yesterday. There wasn't anything wrong with what he said at the beginning, but the next sentence made Wei Wei's eyebrows raise. The deceased's appearance was outstanding. It is very likely that someone failed in courtship and wanted to kill. Hellion Vivian did not say anything. Looking at the coroner's appearance, she knew that this guy was definitely talking nonsense. The coroner did not have the slightest intention of stopping. Looking around, he pretended to be deep in thought. White Academy locks every night, except for the students who live here. It is very difficult for others to break in. When the coroner said this, everyone gasped. Some of the students couldn't help but ask, Master, are you saying that the murderer is in the academy? It was very possible that a fellow student who studied together was a scoundrel who was aroused by lust. This made those young ladies from the superior compound extremely uneasy. You look at me, I look at you. Their complexions were extremely pale. They never would have thought that something like this would happen when the consort selection was just around the corner. The coroner didn't know that his words would cause such a big reaction. He waved his hand and said, I'm just guessing. We need to continue investigating to know the cause of death. However, we can be sure that the murderer is a man. Hellion Vivian didn't want to get involved, but this case had a huge impact. If the coroner made people think that they only needed to be careful of men and didn't need to guard against women, then the students would be led astray. Therefore, she laughed softly. From what you're saying, this classmate's death must have been due to her beautiful appearance, which led to the fatal disaster? The coroner didn't think that someone would interrupt at this time. He glanced at Hellion Vivian and said somewhat impatiently, of course. Since you're so sure, this student doesn't understand one thing. Hellion Vivian's voice was indifferent. Since someone was aroused by lust, then why wasn't the deceased's clothes damaged in the slightest? The coroner was stunned. Only now did he notice the details that Hellion Vivian said. If it was normal times, he wouldn't have noticed it. However, this time, he saw that the master wanted to settle this matter as soon as possible, so he didn't investigate in detail. The coroner didn't recognize Hellion Vivian. He only felt that a woman had pointed out his mistake in front of everyone, making him somewhat embarrassed. The students weren't ordinary people who didn't know anything. Now that they heard Hellion Vivian's analysis, they all looked at the coroner, waiting for a reasonable explanation. The coroner steadied his mind and said to Hellion Vivian, you don't need to argue with this old man. Once this old man has carefully examined the corpse, the truth will naturally come to light. However, the culprit must be among you all. After he finished speaking, he waved his sleeves and walked to the side of the magistrate. He cupped his hands and said, My lord, this old man begs you to send more soldiers to the academy. Firstly, they can protect the other students, and secondly, they can prevent the culprit from escaping. We'll do as the coroner says. The prefectural magistrate waved his hand in satisfaction. He had thought further than the coroner. He did not care whether he could catch the murderer or not, as long as the prince ordered him to keep an eye on the White Academy's movements during this period of time. He could take this opportunity to send more soldiers to the academy. Yuan Ming looked at this scene and his eyes lit up. Woman, do you want to consider leaving this place? Now. Hellion Vivian knew that Yuan Ming wouldn't ask her to leave for no reason. She raised an eyebrow and asked why. Yuan Ming said in a low voice, "This is most likely a burial mound made by the Taoists." Hellion Vivian heard Yuan Ming's words and frowned. In ancient times, what was called a burial mound was a large group of graves. In other words, it wasn't as simple as one or two small burial mounds. At least an entire family had to die to qualify. Once the burial mound is started, it can't be stopped. It will only be considered complete when the last person in the array is dead. It's not too late for you to leave now. The resentment will have a great impact on you now. Yuan Ming glanced at the magistrate who had just left. His eyes were filled with mockery. I don't believe that those humans can find the source within 2 days. In 2 more nights the moon will be full. You won't be able to withstand it. Hellion Vivian knew that Yuan Ming was right, but she felt that she couldn't just leave like this. How about we evacuate the students first? The so-called burial mound means that no matter where they go, they will be in this burial mound. Yuan Ming looked at her and said calmly, I can help you cover your scent with my demonic nature, but the others can't. Even if they leave here, they will die. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. She thought for a while and said, so, if I want to live, I have to find the source? Yes. Yuan Ming smiled evilly. You want to find it? Hellion Vivian nodded lazily. I haven't used my brain for a long time. According to what you just said, letting them stay in the academy will narrow the search area, right? That's right. Yuan Ming thought that she was worthy of being his prey. She was unexpectedly smart. Hellion Vivian went through the collected information in her mind. When she passed by the back of the mountain, she glanced at the green dragon lake. Raindrops fell on it, but it didn't sound clear at all. The light was also hazy, as if there was a layer of gauze. Chapter 394. At this moment, at the crime scene of the Superior compound, a woman shook her head. Her long curly hair covered her pretty face. Her action was a little strange, as if she was a puppet being manipulated. The few soldiers who stayed behind did not suspect anything. They had already heard the coroner's words and identified the murderer as a man. Then, the moment the wooden door was closed, a gust of wind suddenly blew past and lifted the woman's long hair in front of her, revealing her small pointy face. What kind of expression was that? Her eyes were empty, and there was nothing in them. There was a smile at the corner of her mouth, and it was indescribably eerie. She was the next one. Another person died in the White Academy. In just 1 day, 2 people had died, and this was under the protection of the soldiers. Like the previous victim, all the blood in this corpse was gone, leaving only the skin and bones. Hellion Vivian squatted down and touched the corpse's sleeve with her fingers. It was still warm. In other words, it was not long since the victim was killed. Your Highness. Not waiting for Hellion Weiwei to get up, a gentle and soft voice sounded at the side of her ear. Hellion Vivian looked back and saw Yun Biluo talking to Beligaju under the flowering tree. The academy is not safe now. It's better for your highness to go back to the palace. Yun Biluo did not understand why his highness came back when he had already left the academy. Murders kept happening here, it was definitely not safe. After all, his identity was different from others. If an accident happened here, wouldn't it give a chance to those who were eyeing the throne? At this distance, others could not hear what they were talking about. They could only see the side of their faces. Someone said enviously, I heard that Sister Yun and His Highness went to the palace together today. It seems that they are going to reconcile. His Highness is always more patient with Sister Yun than others. The position of secondary consort must be Sister Yun. I'm afraid someone will be anxious. Their voices weren't loud to begin with. It seemed that they were deliberately saying it for Hellion Vivian to hear. But what annoyed them was that Hellion Vivian did not react at all. The faint smile at the corner of his mouth made them even more unwilling. If a woman like Yun Biluo became the third princess consort, they would have nothing to say. But it had to be such an ugly woman. Hellion Vivian ignored the two men. Her time was precious. Wait, what was that? Hellion Vivian squatted down and looked at the arm of the deceased. Black spots. Why are you standing here? The Yamen runners who were carrying the corpse were already irritable. Now that they saw a student standing in their way, their tone became even more unfriendly. Hellion Vivian didn't say anything. She quickly stood up. The bailiffs walked forward cursing. Thinking about it, it was really bad luck. Accidents happened one after another, and there was no end to the deaths. When the time came, the Lord would definitely be angry. If the Lord was angry, how could they, as subordinates, live a good life? He didn't know who the culprit was. How could he be so ruthless? According to the autopsy, all the people who died this time had their blood sucked dry for some reason. Although the officials were not gods with profound martial qi, they knew that sucking other people's blood to enhance one's martial qi was a forbidden curse in the divine mainland. No matter who the culprit was, there must be something terrible. The Yamen runners shuddered at the same time. They took a look at the corpse that was being carried and hurried out of the superior compound. Hellion Weiwei retracted her gaze from the few Yamen runners and saw Yun Biluo looking at her with a pitiful expression. Miss Weiwei, please help me persuade His Highness to return to the palace. I don't have time. Not to mention that if she did not ask him to watch Green Dragon Lake, he would not be taken away as a suspect. She could not wait any longer. Bang! Hellion Vivian pushed open the wooden door in front of her. Bailey Jiaju was unbuttoning his shirt when he heard the noise. He slowly raised his eyes, but his expression was definitely not pleasant. He merely looked at Hellion Weiwei, who was standing in front of the door. Chapter 395. Hellion Vivian paused her steps and thought for a moment before opening her mouth. I need your help. What help? Beligaju's tone was very indifferent, with a trace of coldness compared to usual. Hellion Vivian felt that bringing up this request would be disadvantageous to him, but she could only do so. Hazy has been caught as a murderer. That magistrate simply wants to find a scapegoat to settle this matter. There should be someone behind him. If there is no one with a higher status to suppress him, he will definitely continue to be unbridled. Beligaju did not speak, only stopping the movement of his hands. He tilted his head to look at her, his eyes filled with endless iciness. Hellion Vivian recalled that he had warned her countless times not to get too close to Hazy, so she inevitably felt a little guilty. I know that letting you intervene in this matter at White Academy will cause unnecessary trouble, but I can't just watch Hazy get caught like this. He is not the murderer. This is the first time you've asked me for help. Beligaju's slightly cold voice sounded in the room, like ice-cold sake slowly rotating, but it is for another man. Hellion Vivian raised her head and looked towards the man. Beligaju still had an indifferent and noble appearance. The exquisitely made robe draped over his body, straight to the side of his feet. He slightly tilted his face, his eyes filled with bottomless darkness. Obviously, he still had the imposing manner of a monarch overlooking the world. Hellion Vivian did not know what was wrong. Perhaps it was because his eyes were too desolate. There was not a single reflection of the blue dome of heaven. Hellion Weiwei's chest tightened involuntarily, as if she was affected by his appearance. Even the air around her became silent. After a long while, Beligaju stood up and walked towards her step by step. That attractive handsome face was like a perfectly cut ice diamond, dazzling and sharp. If I help you, what can I get in return? The throne. Hellion Vivian looked at him, her eyes dark. I will do my best to help you sit on that throne. Beligaju laughed, but it was as cold as a sword. Do you think that without you I won't be able to get that position? Or do you think that I must have that position? Hellion Vivian didn't say anything. Of course, she knew that even without her, the man in front of her could easily obtain the world's throne. It was only a matter of time. When you need me, you can come here. If you don't, you can just throw me aside. Beligaju forced her into a corner and lowered his head slightly. The smell of sandalwood was followed by an indescribable coldness. Why do you have to take all the good things in the world? Hellion Vivian clung to that unsettling heat, wanting to end this situation as soon as possible. When she looked up, her eyes were clearer than ever. Your Highness has decided to help me. Seeing the rare anxious look on the girl's face, Bailey Hanbing snorted coldly with a faint smile. You are really worried about him. He let go of her hand with so much force that Hellion Vivian almost lost her balance. Fortunately, she didn't like to pretend to be weak like Yun Biluo. Otherwise, the royal family's strength would be enough to throw her out. Hellion Vivian pressed her aching wrist. Listening to the man said coldly, I can help you, but in return, I want you to promise me one thing. Okay. This time she owed him. You promised so quickly. She didn't know what she did wrong. Hellion Vivian could see that Beligaju's eyes were getting colder. He looked at her with an almost arrogant look. His eyes were cold. Seems that he is really important to you. Hellion Vivian didn't deny it. She only wanted to save him now. Beligaju took a deep look at her again. His long sleeves moved slightly, and his voice was so calm that it was almost cold. Shadow. Yes, Your Highness. Shadow passed by the treetops and knelt on the ground with one knee. Bailey Jiaju took out a token and said, Go and find out where the magistrate is now. Show this to him and tell him not to simply arrest people as a scapegoat. If he does this kind of thing too often, be careful of his official position. Yes. Shadow took the order and stood up immediately. But before he left, he deliberately looked at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian knew that Shadow was blaming her. His last look was too obvious. She also knew that her request this time was a little too much. This kind of decision was very likely to get Bailey Jiaju into trouble. She was just a little anxious and wanted to give it a try. She didn't expect that he would agree. Hellion Vivian thought for a while and said, If Your Highness needs me in the future, I'll do anything for you. If I don't want you to do that, then I want you to accompany me in bed. Beligaju took off his outer robe and threw it aside in a cold voice. Hellion Vivian choked on her words. Little seventh prince, who walked in with the hidden beast, saw this scene. Third brother was obviously in a bad mood. Yes. Why don't I just quietly step back? It had to be said that little seventh prince's idea was wise. But he wanted to hide while dragging such a big thing? Haha. Dream on. Beligaju looked at the little one who was in a dilemma and raised an eyebrow. Come here. The little one shuddered and walked over. He didn't forget to share the food. Third brother, I caught a hidden beast to make lunch for you. Unfortunately, Beligaju wasn't a foodie like him. I thought you would be in the palace right now. The academy is a mess, don't you know? The little one rubbed his tiger head guiltily. Then, he saw his third sister-in-law standing at the side and automatically walked over with his short legs. He squatted in a corner with Hellion Vivian and stood in a row. At the same time, he was stared at by two pairs of round eyes, one big and one small. His Highness didn't feel anything at all. His cold side profile had a faint indifference as he casually drank the tea in his hand. From time to time he would flip through the ancient book in his hand. His posture was languid and luxurious, and extremely beautiful. Occasionally when he stopped, he would glance to the side indifferently. One could successfully see the adult and the child immediately stand up straight, full of vigilance. Even their movements seemed to be in sync with each other. Beligaju calmly retracted his gaze. Little Seventh heaved a sigh of relief. His heart was thumping wildly. He thought angrily to himself, it's fine if he's reading a book, but why did he have to look in our direction? He was so scared that he couldn't breathe. Third brother is so scary. Regarding this point, Wei Wei also felt the same way. She always felt that the oppressive feeling emitted from Bailey Jiaju's body was unusually strong. Chapter 396. At this moment, the magistrate was sitting in his sedan, analyzing the current situation. The suspect had been caught. The murderer was most likely young Master He, the last person who came into contact with the victim. As for how the second student died, he did not care at all. As long as the case was pinned on one person, the case could be closed. Young Master He's identity was a little tricky. However, there was no other way. He had been to the Green Dragon Lake. According to the prince, Anyone who had been to the Green Dragon Lake had to be secretly executed. He was supported by the prince. Compared to the Hay family, he was more afraid of offending the prince. While the magistrate was thinking, the carriage suddenly stopped. "What's wrong?" the magistrate shouted impatiently. The manservant respectfully handed over a token. The token was not big, and it was just enough to be held in one hand. On the surface there was nothing special about it. However, the words written on it made the magistrate lose his footing and almost collapse in the carriage. His Majesty has arrived in person. The magistrate's first reaction was to wonder if the retired emperor had found out that he had cooperated with the prince and had come to punish him personally. The servant had never seen his master so nervous before. His face had turned deathly pale, and he no longer had his usual domineering attitude. The magistrate opened the letter with trembling fingers. His face was completely pale. It was the royal family. After reading the letter, the magistrate froze. He could not stop the chill in his heart and he almost fell to the ground. He did not want to go any further. The prince. Only the prince could save him now. The magistrate pulled the curtain open and shouted anxiously, turn around. Don't go to the academy. Tell them to release young Master Hay immediately." "Don't go to the academy? But we finally have a clue for this case." The coroner sitting next to him did not know what was going on. The magistrate gnashed his teeth. "Why bother with the case now? I'm afraid I can't even keep my life. Turn around quickly and go to the Murong mansion." Drip, drip, drip. The rain fell on the banana leaves. Apart from Murong Wang, there was also a handsome man in white sitting in the Murong palace. The prefectural magistrate was drenched from head to toe. When he saw the man, he was shocked at first. Then he handed over the token in his hand. "Young master, do you recognize this?" The man looked at the token and didn't say anything. He just narrowed his eyes slightly and a deep look flashed across his eyes. King Murong could not stand still. There was fear on his face, but there was also a viciousness that could not be concealed. "This is the third prince's token." Yes, this lowly official entered the White Academy to handle a case this time. "It seems that I have offended him and caught someone who shouldn't be caught. With the means of the royal family, they will definitely know that I didn't have the emperor's permission and cooperated with the prince to privately transfer the officers and soldiers of the Ministry of Appointments. Your Highness, you must save me, Your Highness." After confirming that it was a member of the royal family, the magistrate panicked even more. "Don't worry, I will protect you." Emperor Murong patted the magistrate's shoulder. "The fifth prince will remember your kindness." The magistrate wiped the sweat on his forehead and smiled in relief. He knew that all these years of offerings would not be in vain. The fifth prince was different from the third prince. Although he was young, he always knew how to be an official and to be in a position of power. If everyone was as conceited as the third prince, how could this network of connections be opened? That was why when King Murong intentionally or unintentionally hinted at him, he chose to stand on the fifth prince's side. "Then this lowly official will thank your highness first." The magistrate kowtowed. King Murong helped him up and said, "Go back first and wait for my order. Don't be too anxious." "Yes." The magistrate retreated respectfully. King Murong narrowed his eyes and looked at the magistrate's back. The corner of his mouth lifted in satisfaction. So what if the third prince's talent is extraordinary? Without the support of his relatives, no matter how amazing his martial chi and talent are, he will not be able to break the situation of officials protecting each other. The rules passed down by the ancestors were to be obeyed. The third prince's faction was just wishful thinking. It was like hitting a rock with an egg. However, at this moment the other side was in full swing. He still needed his master to make a decision for him, because as the magistrate had said, if someone found out that he was trying to mobilize the capital's imperial guards, he would face the great crime of being beheaded. "Master, what do you think I should do now?" The man gently turned the cup in his palm and took a sip. He said casually, "Since your highness is ready to do it, why don't you take advantage of this opportunity to finish it?" King Murong paused. He looked at the man in disbelief. "Young master, you mean, what I mean is not important. The key is what your highness thinks." The man lowered his voice. The eerie wind blew into Quan Jingji's ears. If the third prince is no longer around, Your Highness and the Crown Prince will be safe and sound. What do you think, Your Highness? Hearing this, King Morong understood. His master was asking him to take advantage of this opportunity to get rid of the third prince. King Morong shuddered and almost spilled the tea in his hand. The man held his hand at the right time and smiled. Your Highness, why are you panicking? How many people know about what happened to the third prince in the academy? No one knows that you're going to send troops. Even if they know, they're only going to solve a case. As long as it's done cleanly, not only will the Empress be released from the cold palace, even the fifth prince will inherit the throne in the future. You're right, Master. King Morong did not wait for the man to finish. He said in a sinister voice, a great man must be ruthless. If it wasn't for the third prince, his younger brother would not have been caught and his younger sister would not have been banished to the cold palace. As long as the third prince was alive, his nephew would not be able to ascend the throne. Why don't I just kill him? As long as he did it cleanly, no one would know. However, the third prince's martial chi was invincible. He had no idea how to take down such a master. The man took a sip of tea and decided to help him to the end. Every year, the military department will have a military exercise. It's normal to exercise at the foot of the mountain. No one will suspect why Your Highness chose to exercise at Green Dragon Mountain. When the time comes, Your Highness just needs to cut off the connection between the White Academy and the outside world. With the help of the magistrate, you can directly encircle and annihilate the White Academy. Isn't it easy to kill the third prince? That's right. No matter how powerful the third prince was, how could he fight against thousands of armored soldiers? In addition, he could ask the magistrate to poison the water in the well. When the time comes, wouldn't it be easy to kill him? King Morong finally made up his mind. Since he was going to do it, he must make it so that the third prince could not escape. Chapter 397. Rumble. Thunder rumbled. It was only noon, but the sky outside was gray and gloomy. Hellion Vivian did not stay at Beligaju's for long, because she still had things to do. According to Yuan Ming, the Dead Man Mound was an evil formation built by piling up corpses. Since it needed corpses, there would definitely be people who would continue to die. What she needed to do now was to gather everyone together, and not let them be alone. Because once they were alone, it would give the murderer a chance to attack. Therefore, as soon as Wei Wei left the inferior compound, the first thing she had to do was to let Tu Sufeng give the order to have all the students gather together. Those ladies from the superior compound were the hardest to please. They could not stand the rainy weather and had to stay in the stuffy tea-house lobby with everyone else. What's wrong with the dean? Why did he listen to that ugly woman? Who knows, Sister Yun? Do you think it's meaningful for her to let us gather like this? Yun Biluo shook her head and coughed twice, looking like she was suffocated. This made the dissatisfied voices around them even louder. Wei Wei swept a glance at those few people who were full of complaints and suddenly smiled devilishly. Previously, teacher also said that the murderer is inside White Academy. Based on the current situation, whoever is alone, it will attack that person. Now, the reason for gathering everyone here is very simple. It is to prevent the murderer from continuing his attack. If any of you are not afraid of death, you can leave. Just this one sentence made those young ladies shut their mouths completely. They looked at each other and coughed softly. They no longer said anything about leaving. Oh, humans are really afraid of death. Yuan Ming looked at the lobby and sneered sarcastically. Hellion Vivian tapped her leg with her fingers. This was a common action when she was thinking. As long as the effect is achieved, the range is smaller. That person should be in the middle of them. That was right. This was Hellion Vivian's real purpose. In order not to alert the enemy, Hellion Vivian deliberately said that to prevent the murderer from attacking. In fact, that was only a very small part of it. More importantly, they couldn't always wait until the murderer came to them before they realized it. They had to fight back and hunt. I've seen the corpses, Hellion Vivian said as she walked towards the group of students. Both of them have black spots on their bodies. I keep feeling that something is wrong. Yuan Ming frowned. What do you mean? Just as Hellion Vivian was about to speak, Heizei was brought back. followed by 2 yamen runners. He looked calm and stood in the hall with an outstanding temperament. He did not look like a prisoner who had been taken away, but more like someone who had just gone out for a walk. Hellion Vivian looked at him from left to right. After confirming that he was not injured, she said, "I have something to ask you." He eyes raised his good-looking eyebrows and glanced at the yamen runner who left. He lowered his voice and asked, "Is it related to this case?" Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. "How do you know?" "Because I did see something that day." He eyes narrowed his eyes. "The reason why the magistrate wanted to take me away is probably because of this. Let's sit down and talk?" "Okay." Hellion Weiwei nodded, but when she raised her eyes, she saw a silhouette standing outside the door. Wearing pure white clothes, he exuded an ascetic demonic charm. Not a trace of emotion leaked out. He only looked at her indifferently. The light in his eyes was as cold as ice. Little Seven was also there, but he was sitting in the tea house, stupidly eating the meat bun in his hand. He felt that there was nothing more delightful than having food, so he didn't notice the strange atmosphere between his third brother and third sister-in-law. Beligaju only glanced at Hellion Vivian, then walked past the tea house and back to the inferior compound. Hellion Weiwei was somewhat dazed by his gaze. However, she remembered that Heizei might have important clues, so she didn't worry too much. Once she sat down, she lowered her voice and asked, "What did you actually see that day?" "Someone in the White Academy was in contact with evil beasts." He eyes glanced at the students on the first floor. "Although it was far away and I couldn't see it clearly, there was definitely the aura of a demon beast beside the Green Dragon Lake that day." "That's not what I want to say. What I want to say is that the young lady of the Bai family who died was very strange." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "How strange?" "That night, she didn't notice me, but I saw her." He eyes frowned and tried hard to recall. "She walked back and forth by the Green Dragon Lake. She seemed to be talking to herself, but at the same time she seemed to be talking to something. But that day, there was no one else beside the Green Dragon Lake except her." Hearing this, Hellion Vivian's heart skipped a beat. She looked at He-Eyes and her eyes darkened. "I know what happened." "What happened?" He-Eyes still did not understand. Hellion Vivian went downstairs and said, "The murderer of these murders was not someone else, but the victims themselves. Because there was a dirty thing possessing their bodies, that's why there was a murder in a locked room. In fact, that thing would change its target and throw away their bodies after absorbing all their resentment. We must find that thing, or else it would be useless even if the people died and it didn't die." "That's easy for you to say." He-Eyes looked at the hundreds of people in front of him. "How do we find it? How do we know who has that thing?" Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and glanced around the floor. Suddenly she thought of something. "Look at the shadow. The possessed person will have one more shadow than the average person." He-Eyes smiled playfully. How did his adopted sister develop such a brain? How could she be so smart? Hellion Vivian was right. Looking at the shadow was the fastest way to find the demon-transforming beast. Unfortunately, before they started to search, a teacher said, "One of the students fainted because it was too hot here, so he went to the private room on the second floor to rest." Resting alone at this time? Hellion Vivian did not think that anyone would be so daring. She suddenly frowned and ran directly to the second floor. At this moment, a faint noise came from the depths of the corridor. Hellion Vivian's face froze and walked toward that direction. The sound seemed to be coming from the private room, accompanied by the sound of raindrops, reverberating intermittently. Hellion Vivian leaned against the wooden door and turned around abruptly. Her phoenix-like eyes scanned every inch of the private room. No one. Hellion Vivian looked at the open window again. The window was facing the direction where Beligaju had just left. Chapter 398. There was a loud bang. The loud noise interrupted Ying's report. Beligaju, who was sitting on the wooden chair, glanced out of the window and ordered casually, "Continue." Ying lowered his eyes and said, "There is nothing else." The magistrate released them without any hesitation. Beligaju's face was expressionless as he listened to Ying's report. He paused and asked, "Where did the magistrate go after releasing them?" Aning did not expect his master to ask this question. He was stunned for a moment before he replied. I think he went to Prince Murong's mansion. Is Prince Murong also the one who led the guards to put on a show? Baligaju stopped drinking tea. Aning answered yes. Upon hearing this, Baligaju's eyes darkened. Aning could not guess what his master was thinking. He just continued to kneel and listen to his master's orders. After a while, Bailey Jiaju picked up his pen and wrote a letter. Even though it was a letter, it was only a few words. Send it to the military camp. The cold tone of the voice made Shadow realize that this letter was not an ordinary one. Yes, sir, he replied solemnly. Then he jumped out of the wooden window. But he did not know that the person standing outside was the one who wanted to kill the third prince. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of knocking came from outside the door. Baligaju was the only one left in the room. He put down the book in his hand and walked over. His face was still cold without any warmth. The door was opened. There was a person he did not know standing outside. But judging by his clothes, he was indeed a student of the academy. The student laughed, but the curve of his mouth was a bit abnormal. Why are you still in the room? Someone died at the superior compound again. The dean told everyone to gather at the tea house. Hurry up and come with me. As the student spoke, he reached out to grab Bailey Jiaju. However, Bailey Jiaju evaded his hand without a trace. Obviously, he did not expect there to be such an uninteresting person. The student paused. Probably because all the students had gone to the tea house, the courtyard was eerily quiet. Only the heavy footsteps and rapid heartbeats could be heard. Occasionally there was the sound of the wind blowing. Both of them did not speak. Obviously, Bailey Jiaju had no intention of following the other party. Gradually the student lost his patience. He slowly raised his head and smiled strangely. You're so troublesome. Since you don't want to follow me, I can only solve it here. Solve what? Solve you? Baligaju looked at the rain outside. It was raining non-stop. Compared to the student in front of him, he cared more about whether he would be wet. Even though he was a demon, he was still frustrated by his attitude. The student tilted his head and took off the hat on his head, revealing a pale face. His black hair fluttered in the absence of wind, giving him a sinister look. Hey, it's been a long time since I've met such an insensible human. But it doesn't matter. Soon, you'll taste the consequences of being insensible. Is that so? Baligaju's voice was very indifferent, with a special kind of absent-mindedness. It was as if he did not care about the student at all. The student maintained the sinister smile on his face, but he was a little surprised. This human seemed to be different from the one he had met before. When ordinary people saw him like this, they would kneel on the ground and beg him to spare their lives. Forget it, this stupid human must have not realized how terrifying he was. The student clenched his teeth, and black smoke spread from his body to the surroundings. His face had no nose and no mouth, only an empty mouth however. Bailey Jiaju only held his forehead and smiled. His eyes were ice cold. Before you eat people, have you ever thought that there's something called bait in this world? You dare to touch bait? Ha! The moment Baligaju looked up, the student took a big step back. He looked at the man in front of him in disbelief. Who are you? Impossible, he was definitely not that person. If he was that person, how could he not see through him? And this burial mound? He must have broken through it a long time ago. But why were his eyes? Baligaju did not speak. He looked down at the student from above. His white teeth were slightly exposed, and he was as handsome as a god. He slowly walked towards the student. His white clothes wrapped around his slender figure, revealing a cold, murderous aura. When the student saw him, he wanted to run away immediately. However, the man pulled him out of his body with his bare hands. This time, the demon-transforming beast was completely flustered. It tried to find a way to get into the fog. At the very least, it had to tell its master that the man might be back. However, before it could even take a step forward, a blazing heat spread throughout its body. It was a pain that came from the depths of its blood, spreading to its entire body. When Hellion Vivian walked up, she saw such a scene. The man's hands were stained with blood. His black curly hair fluttered to his waist. He was like a god in the dark. He was so handsome that one could not take their eyes off him. There was a deep sense of mockery in his eyes. That wild aura and the seductive corners of his mouth made even the magical beasts hidden deep in the academy tremble and be captivated by him. Under the light, his face was almost perfect. It was naturally cold. However, Beligaju did not expect Hellion Vivian to walk up at this moment. He put his hands behind his back as if he was trying to hide something. How ridiculous. He, who had always regarded the world as nothing, was actually concerned about how others looked at him. That was right. He did not want his prey to see his bloodthirsty look. Are you okay? A clear voice came into his ears. As she was running too fast, she seemed to be worried. Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian. The hostility in his eyes faded away. He wondered how much she had seen just now. However, that person started to touch it. She touched it left and right. Then she raised her head. Her face was full of seriousness. Do you have time to learn from each other? To be honest, when she saw His Highness's posture just now, she really wanted to fight with him. She wanted to see where his limit was. How did he crush a magical beast with his bare hands? Bailey Jiaju smirked. Ordinary people would have thought of him as a monster if they saw his killing skills. She was the only one who wanted to fight with him from time to time. Sure. Beligaju's voice was calm. What do you want to bet? Hellion Vivian, anything. As long as His Highness was willing to fight with her. Beligaju looked at her. As if he thought of something, evil appeared in his eyes. Then the loser will warm the bed. Chapter 399. Warm the bed? Hellion Vivian instinctively felt that something was not right. After all, she had been tricked by someone's words. For example, the obligation of husband and wife. Come to think of it, the definition of warming the bed was, if she won, he would warm the bed for her. If she lost, she would warm the bed for him. Was there a difference between winning and losing? Hellion Vivian was speechless. Therefore, when His Highness agreed to fight with her, it was a trap for her to fall into. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows slightly. She crossed her arms and glanced at the man beside her. She saw that on that noble and flawless face, there was still a wicked and wanton arc. When the sun shone on it, it was like the shards of a diamond. Every part of it was just the right amount of handsomeness. When his thin lips pressed closer, he directly pressed them behind her ear. What? Are you going back on your words? Hellion Vivian trembled. She did not say anything. Yuan Ming's voice rang out. The formation has been broken. The person who set up the formation should still be at Green Dragon Lake. Don't flirt with your man for now. Hurry up and go to Green Dragon Lake to see who is controlling the formation. Hellion Vivian did not bother to correct Yuan Ming. She jumped out of the wooden window and flew toward Green Dragon Lake. Beligaju retracted his finger. His eyes fell on the evil beast on the ground. He stepped on it casually with his left foot. Puff! Beside Green Dragon Lake, the little one with the gourd on his back was in pain. Black blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Master, the demon-transforming beast seems to have been killed. That person's spiritual power was too strong. Before I could react, I know. The man reached out and patted the little one's head. There was a comforting warmth in his voice. The dead man burial ground is no more. There is still the slaughtering of the courtyard. Emperor Murong's army should be here soon. However, we can't stay here any longer. Let's go now. As he said that, the man opened the paper umbrella in his palm and walked into the thick mist. Hellion Vivian, who had rushed over, only had time to see a blurry figure. Without any hesitation, Hellion Vivian struck with her left hand. A swoosh was heard. Lu Guang's silver knife shot towards the man's back. Hellion Vivian clearly heard the sound of clothes being torn. Then it sounded like a child exclaiming, "Master!" However, when she got there, other than the bloodstains on the ground, there was nothing else. He really escaped quickly. Moreover, this person was very smart. Originally, she had stabbed him because she wanted to use the bloodstains to determine his location. However, other than the first pool of blood, Hellion Vivian did not find a second pool of blood. It was obvious that the other party had thought of this and reacted accordingly at the first moment. Such a meticulous mind was truly difficult to deal with. With your current cultivation, you won't be able to deal with that person. Yuan Ming's figure floated up, his eyes looking at the gradually dissipating mist on the lake. His formation was just broken. His body is a bit weak. Under normal circumstances, if you were to fight face-to-face, woman, your chances of winning are very low. Hellion Vivian picked up the silver knife that had fallen on the ground and put it back behind her waist. Her movements were handsome. I really want to see what kind of person he is. You'd better not see him. Yuan Ming rubbed his aching temples and curved his thin lips. However, to be able to hurt such a person, woman, you're already very abnormal. I think he thought of dodging, but he didn't expect your knife to be so fast. Hellion Vivian smiled and did not continue speaking. At this moment, the sound of footsteps could be heard from outside. The sound was too loud, it was hard to ignore it. Hellion Vivian reached out and grabbed a classmate who ran out, asking in a low voice, "What's going on?" That student shook his head, looking confused. "It's the prefectural magistrate. The prefectural magistrate is here with his soldiers." Prefectural magistrate? Before Hellion Vivian could think about it, she saw the prefectural magistrate walking in with a group of soldiers behind him. There were too many soldiers in that group, and they were guarding every exit of the academy. Hellion Vivian faintly felt that there was some kind of danger. In her previous life, she dealt with such matters. Therefore, she was very sensitive to the slightest sign of trouble. Hellion Weiwei paused her steps and glanced at the outside of the courtyard. The bailiffs outside had been replaced by armored soldiers. If they were only here to investigate a murder case, it would not be so grand that even the soldiers from the army would be transferred here. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly thumped. Investigating a murder case didn't require such a large formation, but if they wanted to deal with a prince, almost in the next second, Hellion Vivian turned around and returned to the inferior compound. Without a doubt, these people's target was Beligaju. At the same time, all the students were driven to the inferior compound, and the prefectural magistrate kept saying that it was for protection. However, the students were not stupid. They looked at each other and sensed that something was amiss. "Your Highness!" The situation was urgent, so Aning didn't care about the people around him. He directly knelt in front of Beligaju and spoke faster than usual. "Prince Morong is not conducting a drill. He secretly mobilized the city guards and planned to cooperate with the prefectural magistrate to suppress the academy. I followed your Highness' order and went to the barracks nearest to the academy. But, at this point, Aning raised his eyes and looked at Beligaju, who was still calm and collected. He clenched his fingers and seemed to be angry. They refused to send the soldiers. Hellion Weiwei's figure paused. In her impression, the 18 Shadows had never been in such a sorry state before. Although he was wearing black clothes, it was obvious that he was injured. Moreover, it wasn't just in one place. Because of the blood sticking to his clothes, it had already formed a shadow. From the moment he entered, he had been clutching his abdomen. It seemed that he had a knife wound. The situation was not as simple as Aning reported. Not only did the barracks at the foot of the mountain not send the soldiers, they also wanted to take the opportunity to kill Aning. But in this world there was no one who didn't know. The 18 Shadows were almost the representative of the royal family in the current dynasty. They were not like the other attendants. In the Huang dynasty, only the most powerful martial arts master could command them. Chapter 400. She walked to a deserted corner. Yun Biluo blocked Hellion Vivian's way. Hellion Vivian was not in the mood to play along with her. She looked up with a cold gaze and uttered coldly, "Get lost." Yun Biluo took a deep breath and her expression changed. She said, "I don't care how you treat me, but I really didn't expect that you would let His Highness take the risk for young Master He." She paused. "You asked His Highness to intervene, right? Otherwise, young Master He wouldn't have been released so quickly." Wei Wei's back view paused. The hand hidden in her long sleeves tightened, but that pair of eyes carried a different kind of clarity and rationality. Yun Biluo's voice softened. "His Highness has told me about what happened between you and His Highness. Both of you have made an agreement. It's understandable that His Highness helped you, but don't you think you've gone too far this time? Are you done?" Hellion Vivian looked back and smiled bloodthirstily. "Get lost if you're done. Yun Biluo looked up with a sorrowful face. You and I both know what Shadow's report means. Emperor Murong wants to kill His Highness and replace him. His Highness and I will be together soon. I don't want him to be in danger because of an agreement. If possible, I hope you can leave. Only when you're gone, His Highness will be relieved of the burden on his shoulders. After that, she walked into the crowd, not caring about Hellion Vivian's reaction, because she had guessed it. A person like Hellion Vivian would definitely not be able to withstand the pressure, and would choose to leave Bang. Another student who wanted to leave was invited back to the inferior compound by the soldiers. They did not understand what happened to their martial chi. It was not until they saw the prefectural magistrate coming back from the well that they realized that they had been poisoned with a certain amount of cultivation dissipation powder. The amount of cultivation dissipation powder was very small and was not fatal, but it reminded them not to use their martial arts. Outside the courtyard, the prefectural magistrate had already begun to deploy his troops. Even though he was sitting in his room, he could hear the sound of horses galloping at the foot of the mountain. It was obvious how fast they were approaching. Although the shadows were injured, they were all expressionless. They were spread out in every corner of the inn, using the vantage point to control the academy's every move. Even if they were injured now, if someone underestimated them, they would still lose more than they gained. This was the power of the 18 shadows. However, there was still no news from the barracks. The letters that were sent out seemed to be dead. They did have people in the capital, but they were quite a distance away. Even if they had already received the news, they would not be able to make it in time. The magistrate didn't make a move, because he knew that anyone could leave except for the third prince. Even if he had the best martial chi, it was still the same. A prince who abandoned his subjects and fled in the face of war. How could he be the ruler of a country in the future? If he ran away, he would definitely be spat to death, and his face would be tarnished. They had planned everything before besieging the mountain. Every move was to drive the third prince into a corner. Even if he didn't die, he would have nowhere to go in the future. Yun Biluo looked at all this and was so worried that she gripped the handkerchief in her hand tightly. The situation was more complicated than she thought. The army was pressing in, and they couldn't get any reinforcements. There was only one end for them. She didn't expect that things would turn out like this just because she asked the young master to send someone to arrest Hi's. No. She had to persuade His Highness to leave the hospital and leave the mountain. With the sound of running outside, every student looked at Beligaju like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. Although they all had martial chi, they had never been in a war before. Among them, there was no lack of ladies from noble families who usually lived a very good life. They usually needed someone to support them when they walked, so they had never been frightened like this. At this moment they were almost crying after a tiring day. Your Highness, let's get out of here quickly. We can't go on like this. Once the gate is broken, it will be difficult to leave. Yes, Your Highness, let's get out of here now. How daring can that magistrate be? Yun Biluo saw that everyone had spoken, so she also lowered her voice. Your Highness, I know you're worried about those students who can't leave, but at this point we can only get out of here first. At most we'll compensate them later. You are the prince of the great Huang dynasty. If something were to happen to you, what would happen to those people who have helped you for so many years? How many spies have you planted for so many years? Aren't you waiting for the day you can sit on that throne? The future prosperity and decline of the War Dragon Empire will all depend on you. Are you willing to die in this Azure Dragon Mountain? What Big Sister Yun said is correct. We only need to take the people from the superior compound and the fine compound away. The people from the remaining two compounds should have been willing to sacrifice their lives for His Highness. Among those people, most of them will also go into battle in the future. Now that His Highness has a use for them, what's wrong with them sacrificing a bit? The young ladies from the superior compound spoke these words confidently. Besides, they could definitely escape. Things were not as complicated as what Hellion Vivian thought. It was just an insignificant official who had an idea that he shouldn't have. There were many officials in the Green Dragon Mountain area. So what if the military camp didn't send troops? When they reached the capital, there would be someone to protect His Highness. No matter how bold they were, they wouldn't dare to hurt the third prince openly. It was undeniable that the ladies from the aristocratic families were so self-righteous. Even the military camp refused to send troops. How could they reach the capital safely? Facing this kind of stupid people, Bailey Jiaju curved his thin lips into a smile that wasn't a smile. Shadow, since these people want to leave so badly, then send them all away. Yes. Shadow lowered his eyes and looked at those overly pampered ladies from the aristocratic families. He couldn't help but shake his head in his heart. These people were hopeless. Didn't they know that during a siege battle, the first batch of people to escape would only die more miserably? His Highness's means were still so ruthless. I'm not leaving. Yun Biluo raised her beautiful teary eyes and looked at Baligaju with a gentle face. No matter what happens this time, I'll stay by your Highness's side and take care of your Highness. Yun Biluo didn't continue because the look in Baligaju's eyes made her extremely uncomfortable. That kind of aloof indifference, even without any emotion, made people feel that there was a hint of mockery in it. At this moment, a shadow guard came in from outside and said in a low voice, Your Highness, the Princess Consort seems to be missing. Chapter 401. The air in the courtyard was stagnant for a moment. Yun Biluo's drooping little face revealed an arc that no one noticed. Baligaju's voice was as cold as a thin layer of ice. What do you mean by seems to have disappeared? I haven't seen the Princess Consort since just now. Speaking of this, the shadow guard paused and continued. The second young master of the He family also disappeared with the Princess Consort. Baligaju listened and clenched his fingers one by one. His hands that were hidden under his sleeves became clearer and clearer. He clenched his fists so hard that his fingernails turned white. A burst of exclamation came from the crowd. Even the second young master of the He family is not here? In my opinion, I'm afraid that the eldest daughter of the Hellion family was scared when she saw the scene outside. She didn't forget to bring along her old lover before she escaped. Yun Biluo listened to the surrounding conversations and subconsciously looked towards Baligaju's direction, as if she wanted to comfort him. She called out hesitantly, Your Highness, it's understandable that Wei Wei did this. After all, anyone who saw such a scene would want to escape you. Yun Biluo raised her head. She thought she would see a furious face, but to her surprise, not only was there no emotion on Bailey Jiaju's face, he did not even lift his eyelids. All he did was play with the black jade ring on his finger. No one knew what he was thinking. Even Shadow couldn't understand his master's meaning. He always felt that Miss Yun was speaking for the Princess Consort at first glance. However, it was true that the Princess Consort had left, but the cause of this matter had not been investigated clearly. It was not good to jump to conclusions so early. However, why did the Princess Consort leave? After a long while, Bailey Jiaju finally opened his mouth, but the words he said had nothing to do with Hellion Wei Wei. His voice was indifferent, but that pair of long and narrow eyes overflowed with a murderous aura. Send these people who want to leave out first. Also, who told you that she escaped? Everyone froze. They didn't understand why his voice was so cold. They didn't understand why they could still feel the piercing coldness when they were about to be sent out. Shadow, who knew everything, lowered his head and replied with a yes. At the beginning, His Highness was probably just saying those words out of anger. But now His Highness was truly furious. Perhaps the reason for all this was because these people had just spoken ill of the Princess Consort. Your Highness! Seeing that Baligaju did not listen to everyone's advice, Yun Biluo's eyes reddened. She quickly followed him into the room. Miss Wei Wei's departure is hard for you, but this is the truth. Aning has just reported to me. When you were young, you also said that you hated betrayal the most. After so many years, I have always regretted it. If I could have been with you at that time, you wouldn't have been so cold to me, right? Who gave you this illusion? Baligaju sneered mockingly. He casually picked up a teacup and played with it in his hand. Perhaps it was because of his temperament. It always made people feel that he was not holding a teacup, but a chess piece in a decisive battle. Especially when he was standing by the window, looking at everything outside with his dark eyes, like a superior waiting for an opportunity to strike, about to start a beautiful battle. Yun Biluo's face turned pale from his words, but she still refused to give up. I know it's difficult to get your Highness forgiveness, but anyone who sees a child with golden eyes will be scared. You were too violent at that time, more terrifying than a pack of wolves. I didn't want to leave you behind, I just wanted to call for help. At that time, His Highness, who was covered in blood, was too scary. A child who was only 10 years old actually stood in the bloodstains and laughed, as if he enjoyed the slaughter. How could there be such a person in this world? Only a monster would do that. However, later on, that child became more and more honorable. Only then did she realize that she seemed to have made a mistake. But didn't she take the initiative to apologize? Why didn't His Highness give her a chance? Yun Biluo twisted the handkerchief in her hand and bit hard on her thin lips. Then what about Hellion Vivian? She was more afraid of you at that time, hiding whenever she saw you. Has your Highness forgotten all these? Upon hearing this, Beligaju's fingers that were playing with the porcelain cup paused. A loud bang was heard. The courtyard door seemed to have been knocked open by something, making a loud noise. Countless infantrymen rushed in and stood at the entrance. Beligaju did not even look at Yun Biluo. His eyes met with the magistrate who barged in. He was still as cold as a celestial, and the smile in his eyes deepened. Under that smile there was a hint of profoundness. It seems that I haven't been angry for a long time. What a pity. I'm not in a good mood today. As he spoke, he slowly twisted his left hand, and a fierce martial chi suddenly rose in the air. The soldiers who barged in did not have time to see the man's movement clearly. In just a moment, all the intruders exploded at the same time, and hot blood splattered everywhere. Ah! Miserable cries filled the entire inferior compound. Dozens of soldiers exploded at the same time, and blood and flesh splattered all over the magistrate in the distance. The magistrate's hands and feet trembled, and even his breathing was difficult. His face was pale and his teeth were chattering. He almost knelt on the spot. However, he realized that he couldn't move at all. He could only watch as the demon-like man walked towards him step by step. Why didn't you say anything when you came to see me, Your Highness? The man curled his thin lips and whispered with a smile. However, such a smile was like a deadly curse to the magistrate. The face in front of him was too handsome. Compared to that, what was more unforgettable was the oppressive aura that he exuded. This caused his handsomeness to become somewhat cold, like a top-notch treasured sword that was about to be unsheathed. At this moment, the deafening sound of horse hooves came from outside the door. The sound was very loud, and it must have been thousands of horses to create such a loud sound. Zhanggu and Iron Horse had arrived. This was a true massacre of an army at the gates. Emperor Murong was not as stupid as the magistrate, who stood so close to Beligaju. Instead, he rode a war horse and stood a few meters away. He faced Beligaju from a distance. He did not want to be recognized, so his face was covered. Rows of archers stood in front of him to guard against Beligaju's surprise attack. However, Bailey Jiaju only looked at him and smiled coldly, just like a high and mighty demon god who was looking down at the ant-like existence of humans. His chilly aura made the surrounding soldiers somewhat timid. Murong Wang, you really have a lot of guts. Aren't you afraid that I will exterminate your entire family? Chapter 402. Emperor Murong was enraged by his arrogance. He no longer hid his identity and tore off the mask on his face. He looked into Beligaju's eyes with a cold smile. Your Highness wants to kill 9 generations of your family, but you need to be alive to escape. Haha, based on the current situation, do you think you can escape? Even the shadows you sent out were turned back. Now the entire Green Dragon army is under my control. If you're really smart, you should obediently allow yourself to be captured. Otherwise, the people around you will suffer together with you. After all, the arrows have no eyes. Beligaju did not speak. The shadows, on the other hand, did not waver. Their handsome faces were calm and their eyes were burning. Beligaju did not let them protect him. Instead, he took a step forward. He walked slowly and elegantly, so much so that the people around him forgot to draw the bows in their hands. Do you really think that I will allow you to attack without making any preparations? At this moment, the cold and indifferent voice was like the cry of a superior weapon. Emperor Murong disagreed. Your Highness is talking about preparation. Are you going to the other barracks to ask for help? It's useless. No one will send their troops. The young master had personally ordered that all the barracks under the 4 great families were not to leave the barracks by even half a meter. This time, Bailey Jiaju must die without a doubt. Who told you that no one will send their troops? Suddenly, a cold and languid voice came from the thin mist in the west. Who's there? Emperor Murong, who was interrupted, was a little impatient. He waved his hand and all the archers raised their hands and aimed at the black fog. The voice only disappeared for a second before it was heard again. It's me. A white fog rose and a slender figure gradually appeared. Her straight and slender legs were more beautiful than a model's. She stepped in the billowing smoke. Her black robe fluttered in the wind, revealing a unique handgun at her waist. Her top-notch streamlined figure shone with low-key luxury. That figure stood in the white fog for a long time. The corners of his mouth were slightly curved, and he had an indescribable evil charm. However, no one could see his appearance clearly. He could only vaguely see her slender fingers lazily caressing Gunshot's body. She looked at Baligaju, who was not far away, with a faint smile. Her temperament was one, and it was shocking. Behind her, a row of people could be faintly seen. That row of people were all dressed in black armor. They did not have blades in their hands. Instead, they stood tall and slender. Their speed was as fast as lightning. Often, people would overlook their appearance. Looking from afar, they looked like a huge black mountain. The soldiers began to panic, their hands trembling as they held onto their bows. It's the flag. It turned out that the black color that was waving above the soldiers was a huge flag. There were only 3 words written on the flag. Hidden Army. Hidden Army. The magistrate could no longer speak. His legs gave way and he took a heavy step back. Anyone who had been in the army would know that the Hidden Army was the Hidden Army. Emperor Murong's eyes opened wider and wider as Hellion Vivian approached. It was as if he had seen an emissary from hell. Murong Changfeng, who was standing beside Emperor Murong, seemed to have stopped breathing at that moment. There was amazement and shock. But more than that, there was an unknown fear. Just when everyone thought that the Hidden Army had disappeared with the change of Hellion family's owner, it actually appeared without any warning. And the person leading it, Murong Changfeng, suddenly raised his head and looked at the slender figure's face. It's her. It's actually her. Murong Changfeng's eyes shook violently. All these years, the reason why he allowed the people around him to bully Hellion Vivian was because she was a fool. In the future, she would not be able to help him in any way. That was why he listened to his father's orders and thought of ways to divorce her. But now, she actually became the leader of the Hidden Army? A huge sense of regret welled up in his heart. He could not hide it no matter how hard he tried. It turned out that he had long regretted it. However, those regrets had never been as strong as now. Yun Biluo, who was standing at the corner, looked at the scene in front of her. Her small face turned pale. She thought that Hellion Vivian left because she listened to her. Why did she appear here with the Hidden Army? How did she get such a powerful army? Yun Biluo bit her thin lips. She was just saying that Hellion Vivian was a coward and ran away. But now, she felt like she had been slapped in the face. Emperor Murong was not as flustered as the others. So what if the other party was the Hidden Army? No matter how powerful they were, they could not win against them in terms of numbers. When Emperor Murong thought of his backup troops, he sneered at Hellion Weiwei. This time you've really opened my eyes, you piece of trash. You're too kind. No one was a match for Hellion Vivian when it came to throwing and tugging. She looked at Emperor Murong and smiled handsomely. This is only the beginning. I'll beat you until you're crying for your parents. Then you'll fully understand what a godly weapon is. Emperor Murong's face darkened. He was so angry that his teeth chattered. It's still not certain who will win. You want to fight against an army of tens of thousands with just 100 people? You're so stupid that it's pathetic. Pathetic? Hellion Weiwei stroked the gun in her hand, curled her lips into a smile, and said leisurely, "You're the one who's pitifully stupid. Have you ever thought about why not a single soldier from the other military camps has entered the city since you brought your soldiers into the city?" If Hellion Vivian did not ask, Emperor Murong would not have realized the problem. But now that she asked, Emperor Murong's face changed completely. It was terrifyingly pale. He pulled a soldier beside him and growled, "Where are the soldiers from the other military camps?" "I don't know. I don't know." The soldier was trembling in fear. Emperor Murong pushed him away forcefully and scolded, "Useless." At this moment, a soldier ran over in a panic. The hat on his head was slightly crooked. He was panting as he spoke, Your Highness, there are enemy troops outside the city. We're not sure which military camp they are from. Our reinforcements have been surrounded by them, and are blocked outside the city." "What are you panicking for?" Murong Wang slapped him across the face. This soldier's words had lowered their morale. He waved his sleeves and suppressed the panic in his heart. He sneered and said, "Everyone listen up. Even if the enemy is the hidden army, they only have 100 people. We have tens of thousands of soldiers. It's impossible for them to defeat us. Don't worry. Raise the arrows in your hands. Each of you only needs to shoot one arrow to defeat them." "Is that so?" Hellion Vivian heard his words and raised her beautiful eyebrows. She looked at Little Bald Head, who had been following behind her, and smiled wickedly. "Little Seven, go get third sister-in-law's gun. Since His Highness wants to bully us with numbers, we can only change our weapons." Chapter 403. The little seventh prince nodded his head in a dignified manner. Then he bent down and picked up a black object. He lifted it up and handed it to Hellion Wei Wei. The length of the object was almost longer than the little seventh prince. When it stood upright, it could reach the little one's nose. It seemed to be made of metal and looked extremely heavy. Before anyone realized what it was, Hellion Wei Wei lifted it up with a force. With a smile on her face, she commanded, "Hidden Army, listen up. All of you switch to the 18-round heavy impact machine guns." Then the crowd heard a series of clicking sounds. All the soldiers in black raised their arms. Their left hand was a support, and their right hand was holding a black pipe. "Is this the equipment you were talking about?" Emperor Murong laughed. Obviously, he did not like the thing that looked like a bamboo pipe. Even the 18 black shadows were looking at each other. They couldn't understand why Wang Fei would take out such a child's toy. Only Beligaju's beautiful eyes darkened when he saw the black pipe. He looked at Hellion Vivian with his dark eyes and did not show any emotion. At this moment, Hellion Vivian picked up the sniper rifle and placed it on her shoulder. She adjusted the aiming device. Then, with an evil smile, she pressed the button. Boom! There was a flash of red light and the sturdy roof was lifted. 5 to 6 archers fell from their hiding place. The tiles rolled on the bluestone path and made an unbelievable deafening sound. Amidst the billowing smoke, the magistrate's expression was already sluggish. His mouth was wide open as he stared blankly at the woman who was walking towards them with a black spear on her shoulder. His legs, which were already weak to begin with, had now lost all feeling in them. "What is that?" The magistrate was out of control. Even his voice was close to shouting, "What is that fucking bomb?" Emperor Murong's face was filled with confusion and a chill from the bottom of his heart. He wanted to ask too. How could she blow up the house with just a lift of her hand? Was it like an explosive? But how did she put the explosive into the black pipe? How did she ignite it in an instant? At that moment, many thoughts flashed through Murong Wang's mind. But the only thing that was fixed in place was that they were finished. Even if they had tens of thousands of soldiers, it was impossible to win. How could he possibly win? Why had no one ever told him? Was there such a weapon on the divine land? What the hell was that thing? However, this was not the end. At the same time, countless well-trained hidden soldiers fired at the same time. Every shot hit the foot of the soldiers and countless sparks flew. Amidst the thick smoke, Hellion Vivian walked casually and handsomely. She casually passed one of the special sniper cannons to Little Seven. The little seventh prince stretched out his small hands and caught it firmly. He held it in his arms and followed behind Hellion Vivian. His small face was calm and there was not a trace of expression. He would attack whoever he was unhappy with. He was very mighty and domineering. The archers who were lying in ambush at the prefectural magistrate's side were all scared out of their wits. Not only did Hellion Vivian's attack make them not dare to act rashly, even the weapons in the hands of the hidden soldiers made them feel weak in the knees. They could no longer raise the bows in their hands. Not only was the opponent faster than them, even the accuracy of their shots was much higher than theirs. There was still the terrifying smoke around their feet. No matter how much Murong Wang roared, the archers maintained the same posture. Murong Wang, who had planned carefully for so long and thought that victory was in his grasp, was completely flustered at this moment. He looked at the figure that was getting closer and closer to him. Holding it in his palm, his thin lips curled up. His deep eyes looked more charming than ever. His sexy voice rose slightly. What were you looking forward to just now? Noah. Chapter 404. The man suddenly leaned forward and kissed Hellion Vivian before she could finish her sentence. The refreshing scent that came from his mouth made Hellion Vivian feel a lack of oxygen in her brain for the first time in her life. While her head was numb, she could only hear the obvious gasps around her, and the dry and steady heartbeat of the other party. The whole sky seemed to be spinning. Beligaju parted slightly with the help of her strength. He grabbed her wrist with one hand and did not loosen his grip on her other hand. He went around her back and pressed the back of Hellion Vivian's head forward. He deepened the kiss as if no one was around. Everyone was dumbfounded. They never thought that the noble and pure royal family would kiss anyone. Yun Biluo's face was even paler. She clenched her fists so tightly that they almost pierced into her palms. Her pair of eyes that were always gentle and harmless were filled with jealousy. A slightly cool sensation exploded on the tip of her tongue. Hellion Weiwei awkwardly wanted to retreat, but he gently swept the coating on her tongue and slowly sucked on it. Hellion Weiwei's whole body trembled like a cooked prawn. She curled up in his embrace, her fingers trembling, yet she couldn't move. The sound of friction between the clothes seemed to be much louder when they rubbed against each other. However, Beligaju did not restrain himself. Instead, he kissed her harder, as if he wanted to suck all the air in her mouth. Hellion Vivian's legs gradually lost their strength. Her body was almost like a puddle of water. There was nowhere to run because of his invasiveness. She didn't know when she dropped the gun in her hand. By the time she reacted, her fingers were tugging at Bailey Jiaju's clothes. The corners of her eyes were red as she threw herself on his shoulder, gasping for air. Beligaju reached out and pulled her into his arms. His fingers trailed along her back. His whole body was filled with the pleasant smell of elegant sandalwood. "If you run around again, I'll break your claws." It was a threat, but there was no coldness in it. Instead, his deep and sexy voice brought out patient gentleness. It made Hellion Vivian feel like her ears were about to get pregnant. The little seventh prince looked at this scene and thought that when he had a wife in the future, he would also kiss her on the battlefield. Don't ask him why, he was just that capricious. The hidden army that Hellion Vivian had brought along looked at each other in shock. However, King Morong wanted to use this opportunity to get rid of Beligaju. He grabbed the soldier's bow and arrow. Just as he was about to pull the bowstring, he was knocked off his horse by the seventh prince's cannonball. A rumbling sound rang out. No matter how powerful Murong Wang was, he could not withstand such powerful firepower. His entire body was sent flying and slammed heavily onto the ground. "You really don't have good eyesight." The little seventh prince lifted the cannon in his hand and walked over coolly. He lifted his foot and stepped on Murong Wang's body. Puff. King Morong felt a sharp pain in his chest and blood spurted out of his mouth. Seeing this, the soldiers behind him put down their weapons and knelt on the ground. They shouted, "Your Highness, please spare our lives." Hellion Vivian looked at this scene with satisfaction. She was the one who had caused trouble for Beligaju. Naturally, she should be the one to settle it. However, she seemed to be too arrogant. Hellion Weiwei curved her thin lips. Her pretty eyebrows and eyes curved. So what if she was arrogant? She wanted to use this method to tell the world. The Hellion clan was going to rise again. She, Hellion Vivian, was going to take back everything that belonged to her. Amidst the billowing smoke, Beligaju hugged her and sat on the peak of the mountain. He looked down at the thousands of soldiers below him. His expression was indifferent and his eyes were noble. His black hair and white robes were tangled together. It was as if a god had descended. Hellion Vivian leaned on him lazily. Her long and narrow phoenix eyes were slightly raised. She looked like a hedonistic playboy. Looking at the two of them, it was easy to think of a sentence. This is the land of thousands of miles. If you lose, I will rise again with you. If you win, I will accompany you to rule the world. Hearing the loud chants of long live, the curtain of a sophisticated siege came to an end. King Murong and Crown Prince Murong were imprisoned. Beligaju had his reasons for not killing them. Hellion Vivian knew that he wanted to wait until everything was over before bringing them to the imperial court. If they were to be dealt with now, only the Murong family would suffer. However, if they were to be brought to the imperial court, all the soldiers who did not send their troops would be pulled out one by one and executed. The imperial court would welcome an even greater change of personnel. Faintly, the people could only smell a message. The Empress's power had been weakened too quickly. It was so fast that the people did not even have time to react. When they looked up, the positions of the important officials had been replaced by the people of the royal family. The four great families were beginning to panic. Master! When the matter was almost settled, the fire Qilin revealed its original form and knelt on the ground. It asked respectfully, should the army lying in ambush around the school remain and await orders, or should we retreat with the Princess Consort's hidden army? Bailey Jiaju unhurriedly tidied up his sleeves and uttered a few simple words. Go back? Yes. After receiving the order, the fire Qilin disappeared in a flash, just like how it had come. Under the dusk, Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju's excessively handsome face and raised her eyebrows. You have an ambush at Green Dragon Mountain? Yes. Beligaju did not intend to hide it from her. Hellion Vivian's heart skipped a beat. How many? 30,000. His tone was still indifferent. Hellion Vivian realized that even if she did not appear with the hidden army, this man would not be in any danger. This was because he already had a plan in mind, including Emperor Murong's rebellion and the tens of thousands of soldiers lying in ambush outside. If Hellion Vivian and the rest did not come with the hidden army's flag, they would have been targeted by this man's ambush. You brought soldiers to Green Dragon Mountain? Hellion Weiwei asked probingly. A prince leading troops out of the capital and so on. If word got out, it wouldn't be too good. He wasn't afraid that someone would accuse him of treason. Beligaju's answer was very casual. Just a few servants. Hellion Vivian was speechless. That was an army of 30,000, not 3,000. She had never seen a master who could treat 30,000 soldiers as servants. However, while Bailey Jiaju was answering her question, he was still able to order Shadow, go and tell everyone that I don't want to hear any rumors about the hidden army appearing in the White Academy in the future. Chapter 405. The hidden army looked at each other. What did he mean by rumor? They had clearly shown up. They did not expect the young master to agree with the third prince. Of course Hellion Vivian would agree. Now was not the time to let others know that she had already obtained the hidden army. She had not prepared all the weapons yet. If she showed off too much, it would be easy for others to notice. You come here, Beligaju spoke again. His tone was a little indifferent, making it hard to read his emotions. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and followed him into the room. Just as she turned around, he pressed her against the door frame. Tell me, who allowed you to leave? I went to get help, not leave, Hellion Vivian said and smiled. Otherwise, how could I save the damsel in distress? Beligaju pressed against her. Save the damsel in distress? You? Wasn't I handsome just now? Hellion Vivian yawned lazily and looked at Beligaju. She wanted to walk out of the shadow that he had created. Frankly speaking, I stood up for you this time. Are you very grateful to me? Beligaju nodded and pulled her back. He slowly lowered his body and stared at Hellion Vivian. His soft ink-black eyes could easily make people sink into a deep pool. Hellion Vivian was a little uncomfortable under his gaze. Just as she was about to open her mouth, the heat that covered her lips instantly took away her words. The hand that fell on the side of her face was now holding her chin. Her lips were licked, her teeth were invaded, and he was teasing her mouth. He was obviously a cold person, but he could actually arouse such heat. From his mouth to his body, and the arms behind her back, it caused a strange sensation in her heart. Beligaju, you can't. She tried to move her lips away, but the stirring of her tongue turned her words into a murmur until they melted between the two of them. The moist heat and the scorching breath reduced her resistance. She could not resist Beligaju's kiss at all. Can't? Beligaju moved away slightly, as if to refute her words. He didn't allow her to breathe and once again devoured her lips. His fingers slipped into her clothes, and his deep voice was hoarse. Your body doesn't say so. She didn't know if it was because of the slightly cold temperature of his fingers, or because of his words. Helian Weiwei only felt that both of her legs were weak. She weakly endured his kiss and his embrace, and her consciousness also started to uncontrollably drift to the distance. Aju, I heard. The sudden noise woke up the two people who were intoxicated. Helian Vivian came out from Beligaju's arms and glanced at Tu Sufeng. She rubbed her thin lips with the back of her hand and her breath was still a little unstable. I'll go out first. You guys talk. Beligaju didn't have the slightest shame of being caught red-handed. He reached out and tidied his collar, then looked at Tu Sufeng. Next time you come in, knock on the door first. Tu Sufeng smiled gently. I thought that a kid like you who would feel dirty even if someone touched you would never be enlightened. I didn't expect that, heh? How is it? Is it exciting to do this in the academy? Feels good. Beligaju sat on the chaise lounge with his legs slightly crossed. His tone was cold. But a 10,000-year bachelor like you can't understand this feeling. Tu Sufeng felt like he was shot in the knee. The corner of his mouth twitched. This icy kid. His mouth is still as poisonous as ever. Murong family, what do you plan to do? Tu Sufeng sat down and prepared to talk business. Beligaju curved his thin lips, and the smile in his eyes faded. Of course I'll uproot them, so that those disobedient old men can live in peace. The rest of the people were indeed in peace, because they didn't expect Beligaju to survive. They chose not to send troops because even they thought that Emperor Murong would succeed this time. Who would have thought? Oh, who would have thought? They made the wrong bet. The people on the fifth prince's side were almost completely annihilated. The emperor's uncle rebelled, and the empress was also unlucky. She was completely removed from her position as empress and was imprisoned in the dungeon, never to see the light of day again. Helian Guangyao saw this and only regret was left in his heart. He frowned at the secret guard who came to report. Who sent the troops to the third prince and let him break out of the siege? The secret guard shook his head. I'm not sure, but it seems that the royal family was already on guard. That means that Murong has been too careless this time. Helian Guangyao didn't ask more when he heard that there was an ambush. Instead, he looked up and said, the clan meeting is about to begin. From today onwards, keep an eye on the madam. Don't let her notice anything. I still need the Su family. Yes. The secret guard lowered his eyes. He knew that the madam couldn't know what the old master had been doing recently. Otherwise, it would definitely be a mess. Helian Guangyao stood up and was about to leave. Also, send some gifts to the heads of each family. When the clan meeting starts, let them remember to choose me. Yes, sir. The secret guard finished and looked up again. But there's a stubborn old man that I can't handle. He seems to be bent on choosing the eldest Mississippi. Helian Guangyao sneered. I know who you're talking about. Don't worry about him. He's just a second-class handicap who followed the old master on the battlefield. Now that his leg is broken, he can't even stand properly. Every time the clan meeting starts, there will be 11 people making decisions. He alone can't change the situation. Moreover, I've already found someone to contact the hidden army. The hidden army? The secret guard looked up and his eyes suddenly brightened. Old master, you've contacted the hidden army? Helian Guangyao's face was filled with pride. I'm in contact. To ensure that nothing goes wrong. I want that little bastard to completely give up on fighting for power with me. You're wise, old master. The secret guard praised loudly. Helian Guangyao smiled and waved his sleeves confidently. It was night. A cool breeze blew and the stars twinkled. Helian Vivian looked at the paper in her hand and smiled wickedly. She said to the person who delivered the letter, "Tell Qi Yan that since he wants the hidden army so badly, give him one." Yes. The person saw the smile on his young master's face and knew that she was up to no good. He did not say much and flew out of the White Academy after receiving the news. After settling the official business, Hellion Vivian planned to see how the things that she asked He to prepare for her were going. Just as she opened the door, she met with a pair of indifferent and narrow eyes. "Where are you going?" Taking a walk, Hellion Vivian felt that it was not a good decision to look for He today, so she silently retracted her leg. Beligaju smiled, his eyes turned dark brown. "Is that so?" "Yes." Hellion Wei smiled. Her expression was very sincere. Beligaju leaned lazily against the door frame and glanced at the package in her hand. "This is the first time I know that you need to carry this thing for a walk." Chapter 406. I'll feel more secure if there's something accompanying me. Hellion Wei didn't know that she was so good at lying. Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian and slowly took a step forward. Suddenly his thin lips curled up. "So Madam has been hinting at me to accompany you." Hellion Vivian was speechless. "That's great. I have time today. Tell me, where do you want to go?" Beligaju bent down and slid his slender fingers across the collar on her neck. It seemed that if she didn't tell him the truth, he would change to another thing and lock her up. Hellion Vivian, who didn't plan to go for a walk, could only choose a place in the White Academy that was the furthest away from He. The back of the mountain. The back of the mountain? Beligaju frowned. "There are too many mosquitoes." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "You shouldn't be afraid of mosquitoes if you bring Fire Qilin out. Besides, would mosquitoes, these fragile creatures, dare to get close to you? They wouldn't be ready to suck blood and would be frozen into pieces by you, okay? The two of us are going for a walk. Why do we need to bring other things?" Beligaju looked at her and said matter-of-factly. Hellion Vivian was speechless. What should she do? She actually didn't know what to say. "Then let's go to the academy. There are fewer people." Hellion Vivian knew that he didn't like crowded places. This time, His Highness didn't have any objections. The air in ancient times was very good, especially at night. The scenery was good and the wind was very comfortable. The restlessness in Hellion Vivian's body seemed to have been soothed a lot. The chirping of insects could be heard all around, and fireflies could be seen dancing in the grass. Hellion Wei's entire body was relaxed. Her eyes were filled with laziness. Beligaju looked at her and pointed at the green tiles of the academy. "Do you want to go up?" "Okay." Hellion Vivian nodded. She had been here for so long, but she had never been on the roof of an ancient building. Beligaju stretched out his hand and stopped her. With a light tap of his foot, he was standing on the roof with Hellion Vivian in his arms. "Be careful, your feet will slip." So professional. Hellion Vivian chuckled and paced back and forth. Then she sat on the edge of the room and leaned back, looking at the night sky. He lazily patted the spot beside him. "This angle is not bad. Lie down and take a look." Beligaju originally wanted to say that it was dirty, but when he saw the smile on her small face, he swallowed back the words he wanted to say. His lean figure was like a painting when he casually laid down. Hellion Vivian looked at him and sighed in her heart. This kind of man was really born to harm women. As if he noticed her gaze, Beligaju rested his head on his arm and smiled arrogantly that Hellion Vivian had never seen before. So comfortable. Hellion Vivian put her hands behind her head and looked at the night sky. There were no such bright stars in the modern world. "I haven't seen the Big Dipper in a long time. How did you find such a good place?" Beligaju listened to her voice and closed his eyes. His long black eyelashes cast a shadow and his voice carried a bit of indifference. "When I was young, I often went up on the roof." "You? Go up on the roof?" This didn't seem to be in line with His Highness' style. Shouldn't someone like him be sitting in a luxurious palace and giving orders? Beligaju glanced at Hellion Vivian's face and knew what she was thinking. This Highness is also a human. I also need to rest. Rest on the roof. What kind of hobby was this? Bailey Jiaju glanced at her from the corner of his eyes and said, I like to stand at a higher place. Helly and Vivian, you are indeed more suited to be the second generation of the Emperor. You are born to be the Emperor. Then when you are resting, what do you usually think about? Beligaju turned the black jade ring on his little finger, and the corners of his mouth carried a frivolous smile. Who am I going to kill next? Helly and Vivian, are you really resting? What? Scared? Beligaju turned his handsome face and his thin lips slightly curved. His pitch-black eyes were so deep that no one could see any trace of emotion. Helly and Vivian stretched and was somewhat indifferent. As long as you don't kill me, it's fine. The main thing is, aren't you tired? You think about killing people all day, even when you are resting. Tired? Bailey Jiaju chuckled softly as he casually hooked a strand of Hellion Wei Wei's hair with his fingers. His fair fingers intertwined with her ink-black hair. The sudden contrast made the white look whiter, and the black look darker as they intertwined together. Accompanied by a low and gentle voice, they outlined the scene of a spring night, warm but hazy and elusive. How could this be? What an interesting game. However, he would get bored after playing too much. His prey was more interesting. Therefore, he must not let her know what he was like when he was at his most brutal. You treat everything as a game. Helly and Vivian shook her head and yawned again. The two of them chatted, and Helly and Vivian unknowingly fell asleep on the roof. When she woke up, it was dawn. The night was cold and the two of them couldn't help but hug each other tightly for warmth. Perhaps it was because of the change of environment. She didn't know when she returned to the room. She was probably carried back by Beligaju. Helly and Vivian took a while before her brain woke up. Then she realized that she was staring at the man. Because of the difference in height, Helly and Vivian turned her head and her gaze fell on his chest. Beligaju wasn't wearing any clothes and his figure was too good to be true. His skin was delicate and soft, and his smooth lines were very clear. He was like a fine piece of jade, but at the same time he had all the sexiness that belonged to a man. Helly and Vivian, who was about to explode at night, saw this scene and her throat tightened. She told herself in her heart to stop looking. However, her gaze unconsciously moved down. Her long black hair covered the bed like a waterfall, gently drifting past her waist, revealing her sexy and perfect Apollo's belt, as well as her long straight legs that could be vaguely seen even though she was covered by the quilt. Helly and Vivian resisted the urge to sit on him. She took a deep breath and planned to get up first. However, he reached out and pressed her back onto the couch. He lowered his eyes and looked at her. His long black hair fell down like clear streams of water, falling on her neck. It felt cool and gentle, refreshing her heart. His pale lips were as beautiful as the petals of the morning, and the deep and light colors in his eyes were so beautiful that it made her heart palpitate. Helly and Vivian's breathing became a little hurried. Looking at this face from afar, she couldn't take it anymore. At such a close distance, she felt that her body couldn't take it anymore. Her heart was beating a little faster, and the blood flowing in her veins was warm. At this moment, Beligaju was like a demon prince who lived in the deep sea and bewitched humans. Moreover, why was he suddenly so close to her? In the next moment, Helly and Vivian understood. Otherwise, how could she have the strength to resist the tormenting full moon night? He eyes rested his chin on his hands on the table, and watched with interest as Helly and Vivian's coldness increased rapidly. He followed her gaze and found the third prince. Then he found that the third prince was calmly dealing with people, but his eyes were always glued to his little sister's back. He eyes smiled and raised his thin lips. Interesting, really interesting. However, he didn't want Helly and Vivian to notice anything. The third prince was too cunning. He couldn't let Vivian fall into his trap. Helly and Vivian felt that she needed to be alone. After eating, she simply carried her self-made fishing rod and ran to the back of the mountain, preparing to bait the fish in the pond. Little seventh prince saw it and walked over with his two short legs. Third sister-in-law, what are you doing? Fishing. Helly and Vivian tugged at the fishing rod. That's strange. It's been almost an hour and not a single fish has taken the bait. Third sister-in-law, let me try. The little seventh prince's face was full of vigor, looking very confident. Hellion Vivian passed the fishing rod to him. In less than a second, the fish came up. It was very big and very fat. When Wei Wei looked at that fish, her indolent face was covered with dark clouds in a flash. She only saw one after another big fish with plump figures in the previously empty fish basket cheerfully swaying back and forth. Each and every one of their big mouths opened and closed, as if they were provoking her. What's the big deal? Hellion Vivian leaned over and looked at the big fish jumping around in the basket, the corner of her mouth slightly raised. You fish are too open to lust. You don't know how to be reserved when you see a handsome young man. No wonder you became someone's meal. As she said this, she patted little seventh prince's shoulder. With a serious expression she said, "Not bad. You used the handsome young man trick very well. Little seventh prince." Hellion Vivian touched her chin as if she thought of something. She suddenly smiled. "Little seventh prince, go and get 2 of the explosives that I developed a few days ago." After a while, there was a rumbling sound. 2 muffled explosions sounded from the mountain behind the White Academy. A few shadow guards who followed Hellion Vivian appeared when they heard the sound. Smelling the thick smell of gunpowder, they looked towards the pond. The fishes were all frightened and jumped out of the water, as if they had seen a demon. The Princess Consort was looking at the pond with a smug expression. The 7th prince was looking up at her with eyes full of worship. Drops of cold sweat appeared on the foreheads of the shadow guards at the same time. They all felt that their Princess Consort was not in a good mood today. Not in a good mood? Beligaju, who was leaning on the bush, listened to the subordinate's report. His thin lips curved and then he followed Hellion Vivian, who was tidying up the fish basket. Hellion Vivian of course knew that someone was following behind her. She stopped and looked at him. "Your Highness, why are you following me instead of choosing a secondary consort?" "There are no secondary consorts." Beligaju's voice was indifferent. Hellion Vivian smiled. "Weren't there 2 just now? They came over on their own initiative." When Beligaju spoke, it always made people feel that he was smiling, so someone has to hurry up. Otherwise, the position will be taken away. Chapter 408. Then let it be snatched away. Hellion Vivian's tone was slow. "I don't like to snatch things from others the most." Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian in front of him, and the smile on his face suddenly turned cold. His dark purple eyes were instantly tainted with evil. He pinched Hellion Vivian's chin and slowly reached out to press his thumb against Hellion Vivian's pale lips. He said, "Are you telling the truth now?" Hellion Vivian swallowed a mouthful of saliva because of Beligaju's actions. Beligaju chuckled softly. He gently stroked Hellion Vivian's thin lips and held Hellion Vivian's hands. "Don't even think about giving up this position." At this moment, Hellion Vivian once again experienced Beligaju's strength. Her hands seemed to be fixed halfway by iron, and she couldn't resist at all. Beligaju said, "Did you forget what I warned you?" Hellion Vivian stopped moving. "What?" Beligaju smiled. That smile was gentle no matter how one looked at it, but there was a hint of unhappiness in his eyes. He said, "If you lie to me, I'll remove your claws." "So what if it's a lie?" Hellion Vivian didn't even think and blurted out, "You'll still have a harem after all." Only after that did she realize what she had said. In an instant her neck, face, and even the corners of her eyes turned red. After she reacted, she turned around and wanted to leave. She didn't want to look at that person's smug expression. But Beligaju was faster than her. He pulled her over, raised her chin, and kissed her. That's enough." Hearing the embarrassment in Hellion Vivian's voice, Beligaju finally bit his tongue before reluctantly withdrawing. He then lovingly leaned forward to lick Hellion Vivian's red eyes. His fingers gently rubbed the smooth skin on the inside of his palm, as he waited for Hellion Vivian to calm her breathing. Hellion Vivian only felt her whole body go limp, comfortable and a little embarrassed. Beligaju smirked and touched her forehead. His eyes were deep. "Well, what is the truth you want to say?" Shao Qi, who was carrying the fish basket, raised his tiger head and looked at the 2 people in front of him. Then, His gaze landed on Hellion Vivian. Third sister-in-law, what happened to your face? Why is it so popular? The weather is too hot. Hellion Vivian vaguely explained, but her eyebrows furrowed. Truth? Beligaju knew that he couldn't force a certain kind of animal too close. His slender fingers loosened, and then he glanced at his strong-looking younger brother. He ordered in a calm voice, "Look after your third sister-in-law, don't let her wander around." Yes, little seventh prince believed that he was invincible when it came to completing missions. Hellion Vivian didn't listen to the words of the adult and the child. After watching Beligaju's slender figure walk away, she casually found a cool patch of grass and lay down. She bit on the grass and began to think about life. As a responsible man, little seventh prince was very worried about his third sister-in-law being alone here. He decided to sacrifice the time he had to eat meat buns to accompany her. He strode with his short and thick legs and began to catch crickets around her. Hellion Vivian didn't know how she and Beligaju got to this point. They were just helping each other. But weren't they helping each other a little too thoroughly? Their previous kisses were all because of some things. But today... Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian couldn't help but cover her mouth with one hand. The tips of her ears turned a little red. She could clearly feel that when Beligaju kissed her, there was some kind of surging emotion. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly went into a frenzy. Then it beat deafeningly, and her chest felt sore and numb. As if she had been enlightened, many inadvertent scenes and details connected. The anxiety in his eyes when he looked at her, teasing her with half-truths, tricking her into signing the contract. Then what about her feelings for him? Hellion Vivian lacked love in her previous life. She didn't even touch the line in the relationship between a man and a woman. Now that she thought about it, he said like to her. Hellion Vivian didn't have time to think before her heart reacted. It seemed to be a little uncomfortable, but it also beat very fast. Her face also felt a little hot. She had read about this before. It said that if a person liked the opposite sex, first of all, when she thought of him, her heart would beat faster. Then, she wouldn't be able to resist the other party's kiss. Then, after kissing, her face would turn red and her hands and feet would go soft. Seemed that it was all right. Her chest felt like it was stung by something. It was a little numb and also a little itchy. Hellion Vivian rolled on the grass and reached out to cover her eyes. It seemed a little bad. Hellion Vivian gasped for breath. Her heart was beating fast. She wanted to use her palm to cool down her hot cheeks, but found that her whole body's temperature was the same. It was so hot that her eyes almost overflowed with tears. An indescribable feeling came from an invisible place. It was like a small hook that pulled at her pulse. "Woman, it's almost dusk." Yuan Ming's voice sounded from the fantasy space. Hellion Vivian stood up. Her breathing was a little fast. "I know what to do. From now on, you and Xiaobai will stay in the fantasy space. Don't come out again." "Wait, I'll say one last thing. You really don't want to consider." Yuan Ming didn't finish his words. Hellion Vivian closed the fantasy space. She casually threw a piece of beef jerky to Xiao Qi and told him to play by himself. Then she called a few maids over and had them guard the back of the mountain. She walked towards the hot spring surrounded by clouds. But Hellion Vivian still underestimated the effects of dual cultivation on the body. She didn't expect that it would be so painful before the sky turned dark. Hellion Vivian didn't even take off her outer robes. She directly soaked herself in the water to cool down a little. However, she didn't know that a certain highness had been following behind her the whole time. "Are you going to move aside yourselves? Or do you want me to do it?" Beligaju looked indifferently at the four maids in front of him. The maids glanced at each other. They were very loyal to Hellion Vivian. Beligaju curved his thin lips and summoned the fire Qilin. "Block them. You also don't follow in. Do you understand?" He said the last three words very slowly, with a thick coldness. The fire Qilin, who originally wanted to watch the show, tensed up and said in a steady voice, "Yes, my respected master." Beligaju strolled in. His posture was slow and elegant. As he walked, his slender fingers unbuttoned his collar. An unprecedented evil smile appeared on his face. He had waited for this day for too long. Chapter 409. Bailey Jiaju knew that he had tormented her miserably, but it was undeniable that he liked this kind of feeling. He also wanted to be gentle, but he didn't know why, but once he touched her body, the ruthlessness in his heart couldn't be concealed. He even wanted to bite her throat when she stretched her neck. He wanted to taste her blood and see if her blood was sweet as well. He couldn't do this. Baligaju clenched his hands. He had to control himself. She wouldn't like to see him lose his mind and only know how to kill. Baligaju took a deep breath. The demonic red light in his eyes gradually faded away. He reached out and stroked Hellion Vivian's hair, leaving a gentle kiss on her forehead. Then he smiled evilly. Even if he didn't like her, he would keep her by his side. Whoosh! The night wind blew through the treetops. The azure dragon, who was sleeping at the bottom of the lake, seemed to have sensed something. It suddenly flipped and the entire lake became uncontrollable. The man in white took 2 heavy steps back. Blood seeped out from his thin lips. The little one with the gourd on his back gritted his teeth and called out anxiously, "Master." "I'm fine." The man in white brushed his finger across the corner of his mouth. His eyes darkened. The little one frowned. "What's wrong with the azure dragon? It was fine before. Is it not used to being tamed?" The man in white didn't say anything, but his dark and narrow eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of unfathomable fog. The azure dragon was still flipping in the lake. Its eyes were red and it seemed to be in a daze. Master. It seemed to have smelled its master's scent. "Master, is that you?" The azure dragon sent out its consciousness, but what answered it was dead silence. The silence didn't fade away for a long time. That's right, how could it be its master? If it really was its master, it would be impossible for it not to receive its consciousness. It didn't have any more hope. The azure dragon lowered its eyes and sank to the bottom of the lake. The next day, when Hellion Weiwei woke up, she only felt that her 2 legs did not feel like her own. When her feet stepped on the floor, they felt a little weak. However, her body seemed to have recovered a lot, and her whole body felt warm and comfortable. Yuan Ming urged her in the Xuanhuan space. "Woman, try your martial qi now and see if you can use your qi." Hellion Vivian nodded. She raised one hand and felt the airflow coming from her dantian. With a force, the teacup on the table was smashed into pieces. In the past, she could only manipulate feng shui, but now her martial qi could materialize like other people. "Your man is indeed the most nourishing medicine for devil cultivators." Yuan Ming's voice was filled with excitement. "According to this development, if you do it 2 more times, I will be able to completely recover." TSK, that third prince is simply inhuman. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. "Don't say such things in front of him. His Highness shouldn't want to be treated as his personal medicine-gathering furnace." As a domineering CEO, what she should do now was to find a way to chase after His Highness. Even though he was now her husband in name, she still couldn't help it. But that face of his was a bit too good at attracting bees and butterflies. In addition, it was obvious that His Highness was not enlightened when it came to relationships. Well, he was even slower than her. So if she wanted to chase after someone, she had to do it quickly. Hellion Vivian thought about the conversation with His Highness yesterday. He didn't seem to care much about whether or not she was the one who was possessed. Thinking about it carefully, his reaction at that time seemed to indicate that he already knew something. Hellion Vivian smiled. That's right, if he wanted to investigate her, how could she hide it from him? It was more practical to chase after someone seriously. Hellion Vivian thought of this and ordered someone to call Xiaoqi over. "Do you know what your third brother likes to do the most?" Hellion Vivian asked as she opened a book. Xiaoqi held the meat bun bribed by his third sister-in-law and took a bite. He glanced at the book and almost doubted if he had read it wrong. What the hell was that? 108 moves to chase after his wife? Third sister-in-law don't read strange books. It's not good. Xiaoqi looked fierce. Hellion Vivian tapped her fingers on the table. "Answer my question first." "Oh." Xiaoqi raised his head and thought for a while. Third brother's favorite thing to do is to sleep. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. "Except for this. Killing people." Xiaoqi said excitedly. "Third brother even smiles when he kills people." Hellion Vivian. Can't there be a more normal answer? Forget it, I'll just follow the routine. Hellion Vivian put the book in her hand into her clothes and smiled handsomely. First of all, flowers are essential. So, that day, Hellion Vivian held a bunch of roses and gave them to Beligaju in front of everyone. The smile on her face couldn't be more charming. However, His Highness, who was dealing with the memorials, only raised his eyes to look at her. Then, he pulled her hand over and wiped it with a handkerchief. His voice was calm. In the future, don't hold these messy things. It's dirty. Hellion Vivian. Dirty? He actually thought the roses were dirty? Haha. She really couldn't look at His Highness with normal eyes. But she wouldn't give up. The unexpected difficulty of the royal family completely ignited Hellion Vivian's fighting spirit. After retreating, she was ready to make a comeback. To be honest, Nangonglai was a little dumbfounded when he saw this. He thought that he was a man who had never been touched by a woman before. However, he had never seen a woman like Hellion Vivian who gave flowers to a man. And it was roses. Nangonglai looked at the fiery red flowers and reached out to touch them. However, he was nailed to the ground by Beligaju's gaze. That gaze was extremely cold. Who allowed you to touch my things? Bailey Jiaju strolled over and held the bunch of roses in his arms. His long and narrow eyes flashed with a trace of a gentle smiling expression. Nangonglai, who was under the influence of the forbidden technique, couldn't move. He could only shout behind him, "Tisk tsk tsk tsk, you still pretend to be disgusted. In fact, you're so happy in your heart." So what if I am? Beligaju played with the bright petals with his fingers. There was a hint of evil in his eyes. If you're so capable, ask Qingzhan to give you a bunch of roses too. Nangonglai was choked by his words and completely froze. After a while he asked again, "Aju, since you like it, why don't you tell her? I want to see what else she will give me next." Beligaju put the roses to the tip of his nose and sniffed. His smiling face was so handsome that it was almost intoxicating. Nangonglai's mouth twitched. What kind of bad taste is this? Shameless, too shameless. Chapter 4:10. Beligaju, on the other hand, was very happy. She didn't know how long it took. Only then did he pick her up and put her in his arms. He slowly stroked her back, so gentle that it was somewhat unbelievable. Hellion Wei Wei was originally very lazy. It's just that she didn't know why. When he was clearly chasing after his wife, her entire body would become soft in the end. However, the side of his face wasn't affected in the slightest as he leisurely tidied up his sleeves. There wasn't a single wrinkle on his body. Hellion Vivian felt that she had a bit of a bad start the whole day. However, the whole school was talking about her actions of sending flowers to the shop. Hei's couldn't help but ask her out to talk. "What exactly are you thinking?" "What do you mean, what am I thinking?" Hellion Vivian yawned. Hei's raised his eyebrows. "The things you did. Didn't you say you didn't like the palace and wanted to leave?" "Oh, that." Hellion Vivian retracted her slender fingers and smiled. "I thought about it later. Even if I don't like it, I don't have to leave. I can also try to change my environment." Hei's. "When you make this kind of decision, can you not be so hasty?" "Oh, right." Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up. "The people who are participating in the consort selection this time, you should investigate their backgrounds. What do you want to do?" Hei's raised his eyebrows vigilantly. Hellion Vivian shrugged and smiled faintly. "Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will win 100 battles. You're saying you're also participating in the selection?" Hei's looked at her face and really couldn't bear to think about the results of the selection. He only said implicitly, "I don't know about those people's backgrounds, but they're quite fair." He meant that you're so dark. Why are you joining in the fun? You'll be defeated in minutes. However, Hellion Vivian really just raised her eyebrows and said, "Oh," meaningfully. What Hei's wanted to know wasn't this, so he paused and said, "What does this have to do with you sending the royal roses? Can't you see?" Hellion Vivian was also confused. "I'm chasing him." Oh? Hei's face was full of shock. After being in the capital for so long, this was the first time he had seen a girl chase someone so swiftly and decisively. It's fine if you're chasing someone, But why are you giving her flowers? Hellion Vivian smiled mysteriously. You don't understand. He really didn't understand. Was there a need for a girl to send flowers when she was chasing someone? Shouldn't it be the other way around? A boy giving a girl a present? I've read a lot of books in the past. My experience in chasing people is also from those books because it's very easy to find a way to match my identity. Hellion Vivian didn't find any problems at all. She rationally shared her thoughts with Hei's. For example, the arms tycoon fell in love with me. Hei shamelessly asked, the munitions tycoon fell in love with me? What was that? Hellion Weiwei spent 20 minutes to roughly explain the entire book to Hei's. Hei's finally understood, but the corner of his mouth twitched. So, your position is that of a munitions tycoon? Of course. Hellion Vivian lifted her chin slightly. She wasn't just a munitions tycoon, she was also a domineering CEO. I've analyzed it. The way to do it is basically to either domineeringly possess the other party at first, or say I only love you in the whole world. Send flowers first, then cook, and finally settle everything with a kiss. As long as the movement is big enough and the scene is eye-catching enough, it's very easy to chase the other party. Hei's expression was slightly conflicted. Domineeringly possess the other party? That doesn't fit my style. Hellion Vivian was a little shy when she said this. I like to do it step by step. Hei's. Who asked you this? How do you think a girl like you can domineeringly possess the royal family? Tell me. So, I learned a little more. Hellion Vivian was serious in her work. Of course, she wouldn't only make one preparation when it came to chasing someone. I also read this book. As she spoke, she took out the book that she had hidden and handed it to Hei's. When I saw it, I was really happy, because it was the one that gave me the inspiration for the specific way to chase someone. Hei's looked at the book cover. The words 108 Ways to Chase Your Wife were written in black and white. Chase your wife. Wife. This is the inspiration it gave you, how to go on the path of courting death, right? You'd better not let the royal family see this book. Hei's chuckled twice. Hellion Vivian sighed deeply. Unfortunately, he already knows. Hei's. He actually didn't strangle you to death. Actually, I feel that what I did wasn't eye-catching enough. Hellion Vivian continued. Hei's already didn't know what expression to use to face her. He wailed in his heart. Trust me, you're eye-catching enough. Right now, the entire academy is talking about you sending flowers to His Highness. Even the teacher in class fainted because of you. What else do you want? I thought of a good idea. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and suddenly smiled evilly. I need your cooperation. Hei's covered his face. I don't want to be beaten to death by the royal family. Last time, he even threatened me that if I saw you again, he would directly bestow a marriage upon me. Don't worry. This time we're doing something big and grand. He won't care. Hellion Vivian raised the corners of her eyes with a unique laziness and slyness. Hei's was about to cry. What kind of sister did he actually acknowledge? It was night. The sky gradually turned dark. In the midst of the clouds, a man in white stood under a vine and coughed heavily twice. Master, are you all right? The little one carried a gourd and tugged at the man's clothes. Her face was full of worry. Master, what's wrong? The man in white smiled faintly. Nothing. Are you unhappy because she sent flowers to someone else today? The little one bit her lips. Master, why don't you tell her that you've been looking for her for so long? For her, you even went to the underworld. You even made your body become like this, but she doesn't know anything. The man in white reached out and stroked the little one's head. I'll tell her. I'll tell her when she really wakes up. But the previous array has been broken. We have to set up a new one. The little one's eyes darkened. The night wind swept across the green dragon lake, stirring up another layer of ripples. The man in white grunted. His voice was a little cold, and he was a little absent-minded. The little one knew that he still hadn't forgotten what he saw today. She lowered her little hand and obediently followed him into the bustling commercial compound. Chapter 411. The next day. In the imperial court, The civil and military officials were a little nervous compared to usual. It was not because of anything else, but because the royal family, who had never appeared in the morning court, actually came. He did not stand, but leaned lazily on the carved wooden chair at the side. He raised his eyebrows and looked at them. All of you want me to take in a secondary consort? The old officials who were kneeling down had their own plans. Now that Emperor Murong had fallen, it meant that the fifth prince had lost his power. If they could use the opportunity of the third prince's secondary consort selection to send their daughters into the palace, they could regain their footing and show the third prince that they were on his side. However, these officials did not think that Beligaju was not willing to take in this secondary consort at all. Lord Zhang. Beligaju slowly called out a name. When I was eradicating Murong-Yu's party some time ago, someone seemed to know Lord Zhang. Lord Zhang, shouldn't you explain how the two of you met, and then mention the secondary consort selection? Lord Zhang shuddered and knelt on the ground with a thud. He shouted with a pale face, Your Highness, please spare my life. Your Majesty, please spare my life. Beligaju did not even look at him, not to mention the emperor who ignored the imperial court all day long. In the purple golden imperial palace, no one dared to speak. However, even if Beligaju was unwilling, he had reached the age limit. As long as he was the crown prince, once he reached the age limit, he would have to choose a capable woman to accompany him. The previous emperors did not have a situation like Beligaju's because when they chose their consort, they would choose the most outstanding woman. However, Beligaju chose a faceless woman who could not even light up a crystal ball. This was not acceptable at all. Moreover, there were outstanding women like Yun Biluo and Helian Jiaoer in the capital city. This would cause a lot of dissatisfaction among the people. Even though this Helian Weiwei isn't as useless as before, but that face of hers is really very unsightly. How could third prince tolerate her? I reckon it's because she's from the Helian bloodline. Don't forget how many heroic contributions old Master Helian made back then. Forget it. She's already been chased out of the general's residence. It's hard to say if she can recognize a new ancestor. I heard that the second miss of the Helian family stayed in the temple for 2 days. Because she felt guilty, she recited some Buddhist scriptures. How should I put it? I think she's quite pitiful. It's Madame Su who did something wrong, not her. Sacrificing herself to save her daughter's reputation was a ruthless move by Su Yanmo. In the past few days after returning to the capital, as long as she went out, she would be pointed at and talked about. She hated Helian Vivian from the bottom of her heart. She hated her so much that the roots of her teeth were itching. If it wasn't for that little bastard, she didn't need to suffer such humiliation. Moreover, Su Yanmo clearly knew that before the secondary consort selection, reputation was very important to the selected ladies. That was why she did what she did. For so many days, the Su family had started to restrain her because she had used too much previously. Murong Guangyao was nowhere to be seen all day long. She knew that he felt that she had embarrassed him by parading around, so he didn't even want to be close to her. Su Yanmo was the only one who knew how tough her life had been recently. However, it was worth being happy that before the appearance evaluation, Zhao Er's reputation had finally improved. Zhao Er. Su Yanmo stood beside the sedan chair and waved at the Helian Jiaoer. She took the white handkerchief in her hand and wanted to wipe the sweat on her forehead. The Helian Jiaoer turned her head and hurriedly glanced at the few ladies who were walking with her just now. She then pulled Su Yanmo aside and asked, Mother, why are you here? I saw that you didn't go home, so I was worried about you. Su Yanmo was stunned for a moment before she replied. What's wrong? The Helian Jiaoer looked up and twisted the white handkerchief with her fingers. They were just fooling around with me like they used to when you appeared. Mother, you should go home first. It's very difficult for me to stand here. Su Yanmo glanced at the few silhouettes standing behind her. They were all wealthy people in the circle. She smiled and said, Mother understands. Mother will go back now. Have fun, have fun. The crowd watched as Su Yanmo left and then came closer. Zhao Er, that was your mother. She looked like a very kind person. Why did she? The Helian Jiaoer heard and her eyes immediately turned red. No matter what she did wrong, she was still my mother. She didn't have any bad intentions at that time. Forget it, forget it. It's all in the past. One after another, the young ladies of each family gathered around and comforted Hellion Jiao Air. With a face like yours, it's hard to avoid attracting jealousy. Some older sisters, perhaps they just can't bear to see their younger sister doing well. That's why they created so many problems. The more the Hellion Jiao listened, the more pitiful she pretended to be. I don't blame my sister. If it were me, I would be very angry too. It's just that my sister seemed unwilling to forgive me and my mother this time. No matter how much we said, it didn't help. I've always wanted to apologize to her sincerely. Jiao Air, not everyone is as kind as you. Think about it carefully. The consort selection is just around the corner. With her looks, she can't bear to see anyone prettier than her. That's why she refused to forgive you. She wanted to affect your reputation so that you can't participate in the selection. That person curled her lips and looked disdainful. Someone echoed, that's right. I also think that the third princess consort is simply jealous. She can't grow up, so she's harming others. She won't even let go of someone as beautiful as Sister Yun. She's simply vicious. Let's not talk about her. It's getting late. Let's hurry and participate in the appearance evaluation. It'll be too late if we're late. The Hellion Jiao nodded. Her actions were natural and unrestrained. The first step of the secondary consort selection was the appearance evaluation. This evaluation was completely confidential. Everyone's name was hidden, and only their serial number and name were left. This was to ensure that the evaluation results were absolutely fair. The Hellion Jiao looked at the score written on the rice paper after the evaluation of her face. Her thin lips curled into a smile, and there was a deep sense of satisfaction hidden in her eyes. Hellion Vivian, so what if you're powerful? You can only watch as the royal family chooses a secondary consort. Heh. Who asked you to have such a dark and ugly face? Not to mention the end of the selection, you can't even pass the first round of the appearance evaluation. The Hellion Jiao laughed. Just as she was about to tidy up her hair and walk out, she saw the door of another room being slowly pushed open. A pair of slender white legs appeared in front of the Hellion Jiao. Chapter 412. The Hellion Jiao could clearly hear the gasps coming from all around. Looking at the woman walking towards her, she subconsciously clenched her fists. How could it be her? That village girl from the red light district. Perhaps it was because the noise was too loud, the people around them also looked in their direction. In the afterglow of the setting sun, a woman in a bright red robe was holding an umbrella inlaid with black feathers. Only her face was exposed. She had a pair of languid eyes, and her skin was as white as snow. Her long curly chestnut-colored hair was no longer bound by a wooden hairpin, and was casually draped behind her back, giving people the illusion that she was extremely clean. The people standing beside the Hellion Jiao were already a bit dumbfounded and asked blankly, "Who is this? How would I know?" The Hellion Jiao bit her lip and clenched her fists even tighter. She didn't expect that person to be qualified to participate in the appearance evaluation. The people nearby glanced at the Hellion Jiao and said, "Jiao Air, your tone is very strange." "Sorry." The Hellion Jiao rubbed her head and said, "I'm probably a bit tired. My body hasn't been very good recently." That person nodded in understanding, but his eyes did not leave the woman who was walking away. "Beautiful, really beautiful. That skin is so white that it's almost transparent. She looks just like a fairy." Yes. The Hellion Jiao did not mean what she said. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that the more she looked at that village girl, the more familiar she felt. It was not the kind of familiarity that she had seen once or twice, but the familiarity that came from being by her side all year round. Forget it, this was not the main point. The main point was how to find a way to get rid of this woman who came from the red light district. Just as Hellion Jiao was lost in her thoughts, someone on the other side shouted in surprise, "The results of the facial appraisal are out. Everyone quickly go and take a look to find your own ranking." The ladies were very excited, but they more or less knew where they would be ranked. Someone said, "Jiao is here, so we definitely don't expect to get first place." "Sister, you're making fun of me again." Hellion Jiao seemed to be shy and blushed. There's also Sister Yun. Sister Yun came here this morning for a test, but I don't know what her serial number is. Alright, I'll stop messing with you. But you and Jadefall are the only two who look outstanding in the capital. Either way, the first place will be between the two of you. That person pulled Hellion Jiao and wanted to go over. Hellion Jiao also had a sweet smile on her face. For the time being, she put the matter of seeing that village girl to the back of her mind. However, when she saw the serial number on the list, the smile on her face froze. She wasn't the only one. Even the person who had just pulled her over glanced at the number in her hand in disbelief, and compared it to the announcement list on the wall. How could this be? Jiao Er is only third. That's strange. Who's the second place? The crowd habitually ignored the serial number of the first place, because they had already determined that the first place was Yun Biluo. They began to anxiously look for the corresponding serial number of the second person. Number 5? Who's number 5? No one answered. The ladies frowned one after another. They were very puzzled by the sudden appearance of the second place. Someone whispered, "Why don't you ask who's number 11? What's there to ask? It's definitely Sister Yun. I'll look for her when I return to the academy and tell her this good news." Hellion Jiao could no longer hear what the people around her were saying. All her attention was on the announcement list, as if she had fallen into a pool of ice water. Third place? How could she only be third place? Could it be because of that village girl who had just walked out? Hellion Jiao gripped the handkerchief in her hand tightly. She didn't want to be so ruthless. She was the dignified daughter of the general's residence. Why should she be oppressed by a bitch who came out of nowhere? Just wait and see. She must find out who this person is and then ruthlessly slash her face. Hellion Jiao's heart was filled with sinister thoughts. She turned her body sideways and instructed the mammy that Madame Su had found for her. She wanted the mammy to privately find the person in charge of this appearance appraisal. She wanted to first revoke the qualifications of that village girl before anything else. However, this time it was not as easy as Hellion Jiao thought. The nanny returned and shook her head at her. Hellion Jiao did not expect that there would be a day when her identity would not work. Even money was not useful? What's going on? The nanny looked around and said, "The person in charge did not even accept the money." He looked very scared and his face was pale. Humph, Hellion Jiao snorted coldly. It's probably a new person who has not done this before. I'll talk to him directly later. Yes. The nanny bowed her head respectfully. It was easy for Hellion Jiao to find Lord Liao, who was in charge of the overall appearance appraisal. When Lord Liao saw Hellion Jiao, his eyes were fixed on her, and the light in his eyes circled her body. Hellion Jiao usually did not want to interact with official Liao. He was obviously the same age as her father, but every time he saw her, he would always look at her with that very uncomfortable gaze. "Jiao, come here. Tell Uncle Liao what's going on." Official Liao reached out and pulled Hellion Jiao over, letting her sit on the wooden chair next to him. If it was before, Hellion Jiao would definitely ignore him. But now, Hellion Jiao also knew the current situation of the general's residence. If she wanted to succeed, she naturally had to learn to soften her attitude. "Uncle Liao, I want you to do something for me." Hellion Jiao softened her voice, a bit like she was acting coquettishly. When the man with the surname Liao heard this, his whole body went limp. He took the opportunity to pour water for Hellion Jiao and placed his hand on the little hand that he had been yearning for day and night. "What is it?" "Not to mention one thing, Uncle will do 10 things for you." Hellion Jiao was not a young girl who did not know anything. In the past, in order to drive a wedge between Hellion Vivian and Murong Changfeng, she deliberately learned those things between men and women. She had a dream that night, as if she had secretly eaten the forbidden fruit. Now that official Liao touched her hand like this, she did not know why her whole body felt a little hot. When official Liao saw that she did not refuse, he became bolder and put his hand on her thigh. He breathed out a thick breath and approached her. "Our Jiao is really becoming more and more beautiful. The more you grow, the more seductive you are. Your skin is also so good." Hellion Jiao did not push him away. Instead, she softly said, and when official Liao saw this, his eyes lit up. He directly hugged her and kissed her lips. His voice was rough. Chapter 413. Helian Jiaoer wouldn't really do anything to him. She just wanted to let him have a taste of the sweetness and whispered in his ear. Lord Liao quickly agreed, "Don't worry, the person you mentioned, I will definitely not let her be selected." "That's good." Helian Jiaoer pushed his shoulder and said softly, "I will thank Uncle Liao when the time comes." How could Lord Liao be willing to let her go? He hugged her from behind and caressed her with his big hands. "Stay a little longer. Uncle Liao will personally send you back later." Helian Jiaoer's legs were soft after being caressed. She pushed, and the two of them returned to the wooden chair. Although the servants outside couldn't hear clearly what the people inside said, they could still hear the ambiguous sounds. The guards looked at each other and sneered in their hearts. They really didn't expect these ladies to be like this in private. Lord Liao's child was already so old, not to mention that there was a tigress in his family. As Helian Weiwei listened to the mercenary's report, the corners of her mouth curled into a sinister smile and said, "Continue to follow her. Then send this invitation to the Liao residence. Tell Madame Liao that I will give her a big gift on the day of the selection tomorrow." "Yes." The mercenary looked at Helian Vivian and was somewhat stunned. If he didn't see it with his own eyes, he would never associate this fairy-like person in front of him with his own young master. Helian Weiwei, on the other hand, didn't feel anything. Holding the umbrella in her hand, her thin lips curled into a smile, faintly raised. White Academy. Beligaju, who had just returned after the morning court, untied his cloak with his slender fingers and said, "Go and wake the princess up." In his impression, Helian Weiwei's ability to laze around in bed was to the extent that it could infuriate both men and gods. Without anyone calling her, she could lie on the desk in the inner hall for an entire day, not to mention that she was given a bed to sleep on. Qing Zhan said uncomfortably, "Your Highness, the princess, you are looking for me?" The unique freshness in the woman's voice was particularly pleasant to the ears in this morning, but it made the listeners feel particularly puzzled. Beligaju looked at the woman in a loose robe who had put away her umbrella. His eyes narrowed as he beckoned with his slender fingers. "Come here." Helian Vivian was currently at the most important stage of getting a wife. Those overbearing CEOs would show up in front of their wives from time to time when they were trying to get a wife. Helian Vivian also wanted this effect. She walked towards Beligaju with a smile. Beligaju lowered his eyes and looked at her for a long time. His fingers traced the traces on her face. "Where did you go?" In fact, he wanted to ask, why did she get up so early today? "Oh, I went out to do something," Helian Vivian said casually with a smile in the corner of her eyes. "What's more, the morning is the best time of the day. Of course, we can't waste such a good time." Qing Zhan was listening at the side. Her expression was a little conflicted, because everyone knew that the princess was a person who didn't care about her life when she slept. Now she said something like, "The morning is the best time of the day." Sure enough, since the day the princess came back with a book, 108 Ways to Get a Wife, she had never been normal. There was no expression on Bailey Jiaju's face, but his pair of eyes deepened. He looked at Helian Weiwei with a gaze full of deep meaning. "Follow me back to the palace in a moment." "Okay." Helian Weiwei's yawning hand paused. That face had long returned to its usual dark and gloomy state, faintly carrying a smiling expression. Those people in the palace probably still don't know that I'm pursuing a certain highness. I'll give them a heads up first." However, in fact, there was no heads up that Helian Vivian needed to do. Since Beligaju cleared out all the shadow guards last time, he didn't even see a palace maid when he returned to the palace this time, let alone a female death attendant. Therefore, the people who served Helian Weiwei were all old mamas. When they were treating the new princess consort, they were all respectful and reverent, without the slightest mistake. All of a sudden, Helian Weiwei felt that her thoughts were of no use. She sat at the dining table and sighed slightly. Why did she always feel that the domineering that she prepared was useless when it came to a certain someone? What happened to a lot of maids in the bedroom? There was none. How could she find an excuse to cabinet someone? How could she show her evil charm without cabinet? Sai Baligaju saw that from the moment she entered the bedroom. She began to look for something with an evil smile. In the end, she looked a little listless. He directly picked up a piece of vegetable and said in a faint voice, as if he was raising prey, "Don't be in a daze when you eat." Hellion Vivian opened her mouth and took a bite. She ate elegantly. While she was being fed, she muttered in her heart. She kept feeling that something was not right. Those girls in the books shouldn't behave like this, right? They even care about what the president eats? Didn't seem like it. However, His Highness was different. He liked to feed her and he would also set who she met. Forget it, who asked her to be a domineering president now? It was only right for her to be considerate of her other half. Hellion Vivian ate until her cheeks were slightly puffed. Sigh, His Highness was really a tormenting little demon. Then she put all her energy into the food. Nangong Lai was stunned by the interaction between the two. After a while he found his voice, "Aju, even if you're being polite, you should let me win. I haven't eaten lunch yet." The royal, who was interrupted by the feeding, said in a cold voice, "Why are you here?" "I've always been here." Nangong Lai's voice rose. "It's because the two of you went back and forth too frequently. You didn't even look to the side. Also, does Hellion Vivian not have hands? Does she need you to feed her?" Hellion Vivian certainly noticed Nangong Lai's gaze, especially this one. She didn't have any other thoughts when it came to this playboy. If she could beat him up, she would beat him up. Thus, in the next second, Nangong Lai felt dizzy and lay on the ground. This what just happened? Hellion Vivian nimbly retracted her left leg that only used a little bit of strength. Her thin lips curved. Wei. Baligaju frowned disapprovingly. His noble and handsome face turned to the side. Nangong Lai was in tears. "Aju, you finally remembered that I'm your brother." Hellion Vivian looked back and raised the corner of her eyes at him, waiting for him to continue. "In the future when you eat, don't fight and kill. It's not good for your stomach." Baligaju reached out and pulled her over. "Sit down and continue eating. You ate too little just now." Nangong Lai, who was knocked to the ground, was dumbfounded. "What the hell? Aju, I was beaten up. Didn't you see? Where exactly is your focus?" Chapter 4:14. Hellion Vivian didn't want to beat him too much. Beating him a little would be enough. After listening to Baligaju's words, she sat back in her original place and continued to accept a certain highness feeding. Bailey Jiaju, on the other hand, casually placed one hand on the back of the chair behind her, while the other hand casually picked up vegetables. Although there was no particularly intimate action, one could feel the tacit understanding between the two. Nangong Lai simply couldn't believe that these two people could be so unscrupulous. Not only were they loving each other, but they were also so unbridled in front of him. Was this the rhythm of torturing a single person to death? After another half an incense's time, Baligaju finally put down the bamboo chopsticks in his hand. He took the handkerchief handed over by the eunuch and wiped his hands. He said to Hellion Vivian, "Drink another bowl of soup in a while. It's boiled with red dates. It's good for your body." Hellion Vivian nodded obediently. "If you can't finish it, just leave it. Don't stuff it." She continued to nod obediently. Seeing that she was so cooperative, Baligaju was very satisfied. He patted the furry head in front of him. "If you really want to go out, let eunuch's son take you. If there's anything, let him inform me in time. Don't go too far." "Okay." Hellion Vivian took his hand and drank a mouthful of tea. After getting a positive answer, Baligaju stood up slowly and tidied up his sleeves. He was ready to take Nangong Lai, who was already crying piteously for food, to teach those restless ministers a lesson. After taking 2 steps, he felt that it was inappropriate, so he stopped and stood up straight. "If anyone provokes you, there's no need for eunuch's son to report. Just beat them back. Don't be bullied." Hearing this, Nangong Lai felt a lot of pressure. Miss Hellion could even beat him, the prodigy priest, without hesitation. She could kick him down with one foot. Who could bully her? It's good that she doesn't beat others, okay? But why does Aju's way of speaking sound so familiar? Yes, I remember. Back then, he had taught little Seven the same way. That was why he had raised a little tiger that no one dared to provoke. Hellion Vivian felt that at this time, she had to fully show her thoughtfulness as an overbearing president. She smiled at Beligaju and said, "Don't worry, I won't let others bully me. If they go too far, I will definitely fight back." Nangong Lai. Why did he have a feeling that the imperial palace would not be peaceful in the future? And wait a minute, why did she not seem to care about Aju choosing a secondary consort? It was impossible for her not to know that the capital was in such a great uproar. Well, it was not like this woman to be so silent. It would be more convincing if she beat up all the beauties who came to pick the concubine. But it was so calm now. Shouldn't be like this. What do you want to say to me? Beligaju glanced at Nangong Lai, who was still in a daze in the study. Nangong Lai gently coughed. "I figured it out." Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows and signaled him to continue. "Actually, this kind of thing has happened before. After all, she is the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. It's not strange that she is the one who possessed the body." Nangong Lai looked at him and said, "The main thing is that she said she came from 1,000 years in the future. This is a bit strange. Have you asked her what the War Dragon Empire is like 1,000 years in the future?" Beligaju's voice was faint. "Her world is a bit different from now. That's the key point." Nangong Lai's eyes darkened. If she was just the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl, she would not have chosen the Demon Cultivator. You know, the Phoenix Girl and the Demon Cultivator are opposite. I think something must have gone wrong when she was reincarnated. That's why this happened. Speaking up to this point, he paused for a moment, then continued, "But Aju, there is one thing you must pay attention to. This is something you have never taken to heart. And that is the arrival of the Phoenix Girl will bring about a huge change to you. You must properly handle the matter between the two of you, otherwise it is very likely to change the entire situation of the War Dragon Empire." Beligaju did not speak. He rubbed his chin with his fingers. No one knew what he was thinking. Nangong Lai looked at his face. In his mind, various methods used by men before began to appear. After thinking for a while, he opened his mouth and said, "Actually, this Hellion Vivian is pretty good. Although she was more in line with your aesthetic standards in the past, naive and pure, and was scared of you to death when she was young, you were very interested in her. But no matter what, she is now the third princess consort. You better not go too far." "I was interested in her when I was young?" Beligaju sneered. "Why didn't I know?" Nangong Lai smiled evilly. "Did you forget? But it's normal for you to forget. I just remembered it recently. At that time I also just met you. When you saw Hellion Vivian, your face was not very good." "My face was not good because I was interested in her?" Beligaju sat back and casually crossed his two slender legs. Nangong Lai raised his eyebrows. "Is it not? If you are not interested in someone, you won't even look at her." He was a pervert since childhood. The more you like something, the more you want to bully it. As if he saw through Nangong Lai's thoughts, Beligaju absent-mindedly looked at him. "Do you think I will be interested in a girl who is scared of me to the point that her face is pale? At that time I was still a child. I was not so perverted. If I don't like someone, I will usually show it." "Then according to what you mean, you don't like the previous Hellion Vivian?" It was the first time that Nangong Lai heard him say that he didn't like someone. Then he laughed. "Are you keeping Hellion Vivian by your side now to take revenge on her for being scared of you before? No wonder you were so interested in her when you first saw her." Beligaju listened to his words and said in a faint voice, "I don't have time to take revenge." He knew very well who made him want to destroy the person every time he saw her. Perhaps it was like what Lai said. The more he liked something, the more he wanted to crush it. No, he couldn't have this thought again. That woman, he wanted to let her stay by his side forever like this. Even if it was unscrupulous. Perhaps when he killed people in the future, he should hide it from her. He didn't want her to know about his unknown side. That kind of cruelty, cunning, killing people like flies, and even taking pleasure in destruction. Possible he never wanted her to know. After coming out of the study, Beligaju went back. Hellion Vivian was already asleep. In order to get enough energy, she didn't go anywhere. She lay quietly on the bed. She was so well behaved that it was not like her usual self. Chapter 4:15. She was still wearing the pure black collar that he had given her. Her long chestnut hair was spread out on the bed. The side of her face was so clean that even the fine hairs on it could be seen. Baligaju looked at her peaceful sleeping face and couldn't resist bending down to kiss her lips. Eunuch Sun stayed in the palace all year round and naturally knew that the scenery on the other side of the screen wasn't something that servants like them could see. He only walked over and waited on the side. Under normal circumstances, Baligaju would know that he had something to report. "Come in." An indifferent and emotionless voice came from behind the screen. When Eunuch Sun came in, Baligaju was still sitting on the bed. Seeing him come in, he didn't get up. Instead, he reached out to touch Helian Wei's forehead. He lowered his voice and asked, "What's the matter?" Looking at Baligaju's hand, Eunuch Sun withdrew his gaze. He knew that His Highness didn't want to wake Wang Fei up, so he lowered his voice as much as possible and said, "These are the memorials that have been submitted by the ministers in the past 2 days. The Emperor's expression has been very ugly these past 2 days. I'm afraid that he won't be able to read these memorials. The retired Emperor had this servant deliver them to Your Highness to read." Baligaju's voice was indifferent as he grunted, "Put them down. You can leave." Eunuch Sun acknowledged and respectfully took the memorials from the little eunuch's hands. He placed them on the carved sandalwood table at the side. He paused and said, "Your Highness, the retired Emperor wants to invite Wang Fei over for a family dinner. Should this servant prepare now or wait until Wang Fei wakes up?" "She's not a picky eater. Prepare the soup as usual." Baligaju pinched Helian Vivian's fingers, looking extremely satisfied. Eunuch Sun obeyed and ordered people to prepare. When he walked out of the bedroom, he couldn't help but look back, only to see that the two figures behind the screen were so compatible that it made others envious. Baligaju was holding Helian Vivian in his arms with extreme gentleness, and the person in his arms didn't wake up at all. Instead, she buried her head in Baligaju's neck, lazily like a sleepy cat, noble and sleepy. Eunuch Sun was stunned for a moment before he frowned. His Highness had never been so kind to anyone before. He was worried about this, and that was why he was worried. His Highness had never agreed to participate in the selection of the secondary consort. Although the ministers did not dare to provoke His Highness, there were more and more voices behind his back. Even if the retired emperor didn't want to break up the couple, he would talk to the princess about the selection of the secondary consort. He really didn't know what His Highness would do at that time. Thinking of this, Eunuch Sun shook his head, raised his eyes and glanced at the screen. Helian Vivian was in a daze. She put her head on Baligaju's shoulder and moved back and forth, as if she wanted to get up. She said sleepily, "Well, what time is it?" "It's still early. Sleep a little more," as Baligaju said. He freed one hand and gently put it on Helian Vivian's forehead. Only then did Helian Wei feel comfortable. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Baligaju held her with one hand and patted her back with his fingers. His other hand picked up the memorial that had just been presented. His side profile, which was always indifferent and cold, looked more gentle at this time. Seeing this scene, Eunuch Sun didn't say anything. He walked out of the bedroom with the eunuchs serving on both sides. The Highness he knew was ruthless and thoughtful. He had always been domineering and liked to kill people without leaving a trace of blood. It was this kind of person who seemed to have given away all the patience he had in his life just now. Eunuch Sun was undoubtedly happy. Because since he was a child, the Highness he saw was a slightly gloomy person. It was a little strange to describe a little boy with the word gloomy. But Eunuch Sun had never forgotten the scene when he saw Baligaju for the first time. At that time His Highness was still young. He looked noble and delicate. When people saw him, they couldn't help but wonder how there could be such a beautiful child in the world. However, such a child could stand in the imperial garden and watch the two palace maids being drowned in the lake. He was calm and even had a slightly evil smile. At that time, Eunuch Sun was afraid of this little master. After so many years, Eunuch Sun finally knew why he became like that. An unfavored prince and bearing the name of the nemesis never lived a good life in the palace. Now everyone was fighting to be His Highness's concubine. A long time ago, every time those daughters of officials came to the palace, they would hide far away from His Highness. Some of the sons of officials close to the Empress would even talk about him behind his back. Invisible isolation was the most terrible thing. So His Highness didn't talk much, because he didn't have any friends. Even his biological mother didn't like him very much. Every night he would pick up a bowl and eat by himself. However, he gradually became more and more ruthless. Perhaps the former Empress was right. Baligaju was a person with ruthlessness in his bones. The retired emperor had felt guilty for so many years because he owed His Highness. But he was most afraid that His Highness would really fall into the devil's path one day. Now with the princess by His Highness's side, he obviously felt that the cold martial chi had softened, but how to solve the problem of selecting the secondary concubine was really a problem. As the retired emperor's right-hand man, Eunuch Sun had to tell Hellion Vivian something before the banquet, so that it would be easier to talk about it during the meal. Hellion Vivian got hungry easily. Before Baligaju went to the study to deal with official business, he had the habit of asking people to prepare pastries in the bedroom. After Hellion Wei Wei woke up, the first thing she saw was a plate of colorful pastries, then a cup of Longjing tea that left a lingering fragrance on her lips and teeth. Only then did she tilt her head to listen to Eunuch Sun's earnest and well-meaning advice. First she was a little interested. Later, she picked up a piece of peach pastry and stuffed it in Eunuch Sun's mouth. She smiled faintly. The selection of the secondary concubine will start tomorrow. Why are you panicking, Eunuch Sun? He panicked? He was completely anxious for her. Eunuch Sun scolded the maid in his heart. He looked at Hellion Vivian with some shock in his eyes. Why was the princess so relaxed? The selection of the secondary concubine is going to start soon. After Eunuch Sun swallowed the peach pastry in his mouth, he said, "The results of the appearance evaluation are out. I heard that the first place is Miss Yun, who was recommended by the 4 great families. The retired emperor doesn't like this girl. But he can't say anything now. Sigh. I'm so worried." Compared to Eunuch Sun's gloomy face, Hellion Wei Wei was obviously much calmer. However, she still raised her eyebrows playfully and asked, "You said that Yun Biluo got first place in the appearance evaluation." Chapter 416. She was still wearing the pure black collar that he had given her. Her long chestnut hair was spread out on the bed. The side of her face was so clean that even the fine hairs on it could be seen. Baligaju looked at her peaceful sleeping face and couldn't resist bending down to kiss her lips. Eunuch Sun stayed in the palace all year round and naturally knew that the scenery on the other side of the screen wasn't something that servants like them could see. He only walked over and waited on the side. Under normal circumstances, Baligaju would know that he had something to report. "Come in." An indifferent and emotionless voice came from behind the screen. When Eunuch Sun came in, Baligaju was still sitting on the bed. Seeing him come in, he didn't get up. Instead, he reached out to touch Hellion Wei's forehead. He lowered his voice and asked, "What's the matter?" Looking at Baligaju's hand, Eunuch Sun withdrew his gaze. He knew that His Highness didn't want to wake Wang Fei up, so he lowered his voice as much as possible and said, "These are the memorials that have been submitted by the ministers in the past 2 days. The Emperor's expression has been very ugly these past 2 days. I'm afraid that he won't be able to read these memorials. The retired Emperor had this servant deliver them to Your Highness to read." Baligaju's voice was indifferent as he grunted, "Put them down. You can leave." Eunuch Sun acknowledged and respectfully took the memorials from the little eunuch's hands. He placed them on the carved sandalwood table at the side. He paused and said, "Your Highness, the retired emperor wants to invite Wang Fei over for a family dinner. Should this servant prepare now or wait until Wang Fei wakes up?" "She's not a picky eater. Prepare the soup as usual." Baligaju pinched Hellion Vivian's fingers, looking extremely satisfied. Eunuch Sun obeyed and ordered people to prepare. When he walked out of the bedroom, he couldn't help but look back, only to see that the two figures behind the screen were so compatible that it made others envious. Beligaju was holding Hellion Vivian in his arms with extreme gentleness, and the person in his arms didn't wake up at all. Instead, she buried her head in Beligaju's neck, lazily like a sleepy cat, noble and sleepy. Eunuch Sun was stunned for a moment before he frowned. His Highness had never been so kind to anyone before. He was worried about this, and that was why he was worried. His Highness had never agreed to participate in the selection of the secondary consort. Although the ministers did not dare to provoke His Highness, there were more and more voices behind his back. Even if the retired emperor didn't want to break up the couple, he would talk to the princess about the selection of the secondary consort. He really didn't know what His Highness would do at that time. Thinking of this, Eunuch Sun shook his head, looked up at the screen again, and glanced at it. Hellion Vivian was in a daze. She put her head on Beligaju's shoulder and moved back and forth, as if she wanted to get up. She said in a daze, "Well, what time is it?" "It's still early. Sleep a little more," as Beligaju said. He freed one hand and gently put it on Hellion Vivian's forehead. Only then did Hellion Wei Wei feel comfortable. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. Beligaju held her with one hand and patted her back with his fingers. The other hand picked up the memorial that had just been presented. His side profile, which had always been indifferent, looked more gentle at this time. Seeing this scene, Eunuch Sun didn't say anything. He walked out of the bedroom with the eunuchs serving on both sides. The prince he knew was ruthless and thoughtful. He had always been able to do whatever he wanted and liked to kill people without leaving a trace of blood. It was this kind of person who seemed to have given away all the patience he had in his life just now. Eunuch Sun was undoubtedly happy. Because since he was a child, the Royal Highness he saw was a slightly gloomy person. It was a little strange to use the word gloomy to describe a little boy. But Eunuch Sun had never forgotten the scene when he saw Beligaju for the first time. At that time His Highness was still young. He looked noble and delicate. When people saw him, they couldn't help but wonder how there could be such a beautiful child in the world. However, such a child could stand in the imperial garden and watch the two palace maids being drowned in the lake. He was calm and even had a slightly evil smile. At that time, Eunuch Sun was afraid of this little master. After so many years, Eunuch Sun finally knew why he became like that. An unfavored prince and bearing the name of the nemesis never lived a good life in the palace. Now everyone was fighting to be His Highness's concubine. A long time ago, every time those daughters of officials came to the palace, they would hide far away from His Highness. Some sons of officials who were close to the Empress would even talk about him behind his back. Invisible isolation was the most terrible thing. So His Highness didn't talk much, because he didn't have any friends. Even his biological mother didn't like him very much. Every night, he would take a bowl and eat by himself. However, he gradually became more and more ruthless. Perhaps the former Empress was right. Beligaju was a person with ruthlessness in his bones. The retired emperor had felt guilty for so many years because he owed His Highness. But he was most afraid that His Highness would really fall into the devil's path one day. Now with the princess by His Highness's side, he obviously felt that the cold martial chi had softened, but how to solve the problem of selecting the secondary concubine was really a problem. As the retired emperor's right-hand man, Eunuch Sun had to tell Hellion Vivian something before the banquet so that they could talk about it during the meal. Hellion Vivian got hungry easily. Before Beligaju went to the study to deal with business, he had the habit of asking people to prepare pastries in the bedroom. After Hellion Wei Wei woke up, the first thing she saw was a plate of colorful pastries, then a cup of Longjing tea that left a lingering fragrance on her lips and teeth. Only then did she tilt her head to listen to Eunuch Sun's earnest and well-meaning advice. First she was a little interested. Later, she picked up a piece of peach pastry and stuffed it in Eunuch Sun's mouth. Then she smiled faintly. "The selection of the secondary concubine will start tomorrow. Why are you panicking, Eunuch Sun?" He panicked? He was completely anxious for her. Eunuch Sun scolded the maid in his heart. He looked at Hellion Vivian with some shock in his eyes. Why was the princess so relaxed? The selection of the secondary concubine is going to start soon. Eunuch's son swallowed the peach pastry in his mouth and said, "The results of the appearance appraisal are out. I heard that the first one is Miss Yun, who was recommended by the 4 great families. The retired emperor doesn't like this girl, but he can't say anything now. Sigh. I'm so worried." Compared to Eunuch's son's frown, Hellion Wei Wei was obviously much calmer. However, she still raised her eyebrows playfully. "You said that Yun Biluo was the one who got first place in the appearance evaluation." Chapter 417. If it wasn't her, who else could it be? Eunuch's son sighed again. His face was very worried. Hellion Vivian held the osmanthus cake in her mouth. She used her left hand to point at the bridge of her nose with her slender index finger. "Me? You?" This time, Hellion Wei Wei made Eunuch's son laugh. He coughed heavily and said, "Princess Consort, you're making fun of me again." Hellion Wei Wei saw that he did not believe her, so she did not say much. She just curled her lips and smiled. Then she sat cross-legged on the cage bed that was made with expensive gold. She held a box of desserts in her arms and slowly ate the desserts one by one. When she tasted the apricot cake, she felt that it tasted good, so she kept a few more for Bailey Jiaju, thinking that he could eat some if he was hungry later. Eunuch's son couldn't understand what she was thinking. In the long years that followed, he had been silently worried about Hellion Vivian's future. First of all, she was a young lady with no power. If His Highness no longer liked her, she was very likely to die in this palace. He had been so worried. Until not long after, she regained the Hellion clan. Baligaju used the blood of countless people to remove all the obstacles between the two of them. At that time, Eunuch's son understood that every step along the way, Baligaju was paving the way for Hellion Vivian. So that even if she stood on a high place and waved her sword to her heart's content, she didn't have to worry about falling. Because he always stood in a position where she could take a step back, using the most ruthless method to get rid of all her worries in an unknown corner. Hellion Vivian saw that Eunuch's son was still in a daze. After eating the snacks, she began to fiddle with the armament parts. She liked these things. In modern times, she would feel uncomfortable sleeping if she didn't put a few submachine guns under her bed. Now, in this bedroom, except for the wall of ancient books that couldn't be turned over, which belonged to Baligaju, the rest of the things such as guns, swords, etc. were all hers. Not to mention those sparkling and shiny armament components scattered all over the floor. Therefore, when Baligaju was busy, she would curl up on the bed, nimbly developing new armaments, never taking a single step out of her bedroom. In fact, our mercenary queen was a homebody. If he could sit, he would definitely not stand. If he could lie down, he would definitely not sit. She would only leave her beloved red wine, guns, and luxurious bed when she went out to fight. Now in the palace, although there was no red wine to drink, it was still very comfortable to play. He didn't know if Baligaju had given any orders. Ever since she moved to the palace, no one had dared to look for her. Sigh, as a well-mannered and domineering CEO, she was also very distressed that her other half was so capable. In reality, the royal family was currently sitting in the imperial study, dealing with the ministers who had come to ask for the armament. It's just an armament. Why would Lord Hong want to exchange it? It doesn't need to go through Wei Wei's hands. Someone will deliver the armament to your residence tonight. Lord Hong was very old and was one of the ministers by the retired emperor's side. His words carried some weight. Now that he heard Baligaju's words, he smiled with satisfaction and happily went home to wait. After Baligaju finished dealing with this matter, he stood up from the carved wooden chair that he had been busy with the whole day. He stretched out his hand to loosen his collar and said to Shadow, who was standing at the side, "In a while, go pick up an armament that the princess consort doesn't want and have someone send it to the Hong family's old residence." Yes. Shadow silently lowered his head. He really couldn't bear to let these people know that the armament that they wanted to buy at a high price was just a defective toy that the princess consort didn't want. That's right, it was a toy. It couldn't even be counted as an armament. But His Highness had this kind of ability. A pile of scrap metal could be sold at a sky-high price. It was such a pity that he didn't go into business. Baligaju looked at the color of the sky outside and flipped through the few memorials. Feeling that it was about time, he simply had someone send the rest of the memorials back to the emperor. After that, he walked towards the sleeping quarters. Hellion Vivian saw that he had returned and immediately took out the delicacies that she had prepared to share with him. Eat a piece of apricot cake. After saying that, she moved the box in front of Baligaju. The imperial family's tea brewing skills were better than anyone else's. The tea brewed by him was indeed more fragrant than usual. His white hand held the porcelain cup. After seeing her movements, his long eyebrows raised. Feed it to me. Hellion Vivian saw that he couldn't free his hands and didn't refuse. She directly sent the apricot cake to Baligaju's mouth. Only she didn't know if it was intentional or not. But when he was eating the cake, the tip of his tongue gently swept across her finger. Hellion Vivian suddenly felt an electric shock. The cake in her hand almost fell to the ground. Why are you so careless? He reached out and supported her. His eyes looked at her deeply. Hold it steady. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. When she saw his smile that wasn't a smile, she only felt that it was bad. Without thinking, she tiptoed and kissed him. Baligaju seemed to have never expected that she would do this. The evil smile on his mouth stiffened and his body paused for half a second. Then, he pulled her whole body over and kissed her like a blooming datura flower, emitting a seductive smell. From the beginning to the end, Baligaju was a man that people were willing to indulge in. If he wanted to, his gentleness could almost drown people to death. Hellion Vivian was gently kissed behind her ear and her body trembled. His hand didn't have the slightest intention of stopping. It slid down Hellion Vivian's clothes and went all the way down. Hellion Vivian suddenly trembled. Her eyes widened and she subconsciously wanted to struggle, but her hand was pressed down by him. Baligaju hugged her from behind and coaxed her in a deep voice. Don't move. Be good. Waves of numbness passed from the man's slender fingers to Hellion Vivian's limbs. Hellion Vivian was sweating. She was like a fish out of water. She bit her lips hard. Although it was very comfortable, it was very embarrassing. She couldn't help but hug the person who was abusing her, and wanted to beg Baligaju to let her go. Baligaju looked at Hellion Vivian's red lips and frowned. He gently scolded, let go. If you break it, call out if you feel comfortable. There are only two of us here. Hellion Vivian still didn't speak. The red color on her face was especially beautiful. Baligaju's eyes suddenly darkened as he looked at her. He pulled her into his arms and pressed against her softness through the cotton-padded clothes. You will definitely feel more comfortable like this, right? As he spoke, he pushed her up. Hellion Weiwei's face reddened by another layer. She couldn't say anything embarrassing and could only gasp for breath. Chapter 418. Baligaju was not in a hurry. He rubbed her over and over again. Finally, he heard the answer he wanted, but he could not control himself. Remembering that someone else was coming in, he restrained himself. He hugged Hellion Vivian in his arms and calmed his breathing. He just hugged her. He did not do anything. But there was something else. She kissed him again, the corner of her mouth slightly curved. Baligaju whispered in her ear, "Don't provoke me." Hellion Vivian smiled, with a hint of devilishness and laziness. She did not know if it was because couples who fell in love like to be close to each other. She only knew that she liked the feeling of skin on skin. The kiss also happened naturally. The sweet taste of the tip of the tongue was very infatuating. At this moment, Yun Biluo was chatting and laughing with the ladies who saw the announcement. Sister Yun, you are so awesome. You got first place in such a short time. That's right. This appearance appraisal is not only for the people in the capital. I'm afraid the most beautiful person in the entire War Dragon Empire is Sister Yun. Yun Biluo listened to their words and smiled gently. She looked like a sickly beauty, delicate and lovable. Just a coincidence. Jiao Er's appearance is not worse than mine. What's her ranking? Speaking of Jiao Er, it's really strange. Those people shook their heads. I don't know what happened. Suddenly, someone appeared and took Zhao Er's second place. Yun Biluo was also surprised. Someone is prettier than Zhao Er? What's her serial number? Number 5. Yun Biluo's hand that was holding the fan paused. What number did you say was second? Number 5. That person looked at Yun Biluo's suddenly pale face in confusion. Sister Yun, what's wrong with you? Are you feeling unwell again? Yun Biluo shook her head with a forced smile, but her hand was stronger. Number 5? She was number 5, which meant she was second. The first place in the appearance appraisal was someone else? How was this possible? Who was first? Yun Biluo flipped through her things in a place where no one could see. Her slender eyebrows furrowed. Later on, those people said something else. Yun Biluo could no longer listen. She had never expected such an outcome, because she really couldn't think of anyone in Beijing who could match her in terms of appearance. Who was that person? On the other hand, Helian Jiaoer also felt a little gloomy, because she couldn't find any information about that village girl. She didn't believe that she couldn't deal with a slut with no power and influence. Since she couldn't find out who she was now, she would wait until the selection of the secondary consort and defeat her on the spot. The first test was to test everyone's martial chi level. Maybe the other party was just a piece of trash who couldn't even light up a crystal ball. The purpose of the appearance evaluation was to select the first batch of candidates. Basically, only 10 people were selected. She believed that among these 10 people, no one was her match except for Yun Biluo. In addition, she had the help of the official in charge, Lord Liao. She didn't believe that she couldn't win this secondary consort. As long as she became the secondary consort, she would immediately let that little slut Helian Vivian have a taste of the humiliation she had inflicted on her these days. An ugly woman with no qualifications dared to challenge her everywhere. She could even conquer a man who was 20 years older than her. Could that ugly woman? Just like what her mother had said, as a woman, whether she had martial chi or not was put aside, the most important thing was her face. Heh. Helian Jiaoer laughed wantonly. She couldn't wait to see how ugly that little slut's face would be when she found out that she was the secondary consort. Alright, stop looking for her. We'll talk about it when the time comes. That's right. It wouldn't be too late to make a move when she saw that village girl. After searching for a day, there was no news at all. It was a waste of energy at night. The shadows of the trees swayed and the lights were bright. The 9th palace where the retired emperor lived was the quietest palace in the palace. Now, Helian Vivian and Beligaju were sitting opposite the retired emperor. The table was full of dishes and it was a feast for the eyes. The retired emperor looked at Helian Vivian. It was obvious that he had something to say. He hesitated for a while and finally said, Aju, since Wei Wei is here, I'll say it clearly. You must go to the secondary consort selection tomorrow. If you don't go, you should know what will happen. Your qualification to be the crown prince will be revoked. He didn't want to see his grandson, the only one who could inherit the War Dragon Empire, ruined because of such a thing. Therefore, the retired emperor mentioned the ancestral rule. Bailey Jiaju was still feeding her as before, but this time he put down the bamboo chopsticks in his hand halfway through the meal. The light in his eyes faintly swept a glance at retired emperor as he said a few words, then cancel it. The retired emperor's face stiffened and he was about to lose his temper. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows at this time and said in a clear voice, what if the secondary consort selection is held as usual? No one will revoke his qualification to be the crown prince, right? The retired emperor nodded and heaved a long sigh. Girl, can you agree to it? This cold guy must be afraid that you will feel wronged, so during this period of time, whoever mentions the selection of the secondary consort, he will make trouble for them. These 2 days the whole morning court has been in a mess, and the ministers have a lot of opinions. Tell them to come to me if they have any opinions. Beligaju's tone was very indifferent, but there was a strong sense of hostility in the coldness. The retired emperor didn't want to see him lose control, but he had to do something to stop people from talking. Helian Vivian glanced at the retired emperor and looked at Beligaju. Then she reached out and put her hand on his shoulder. I want to talk to my father. Emperor father is going to have a good talk. Don't interrupt. Hearing this, Beligaju raised his lower lip and the corners of his mouth curved into a playful smile. This little girl dared to order him? Heh. Very well, he wanted to hear what she wanted to say. Imperial grandfather. Helian Weiwei chuckled as she met retired emperor's eyes. Selecting a secondary consort is fine, but I've heard that the reason why we want to select a secondary consort is because of the rules passed down by our ancestors. When the heir apparent reaches adulthood, he must find a girl who is extremely beautiful no matter in terms of martial chi or appearance to assist the heir apparent. Only then can we guarantee the prosperity and power of our Dragon War Empire. Since you want to find a more perfect woman, it should be okay if I participate in the secondary consort selection, right? The retired emperor was stunned and said, "No problem, but..." He didn't forget that the reason why the secondary consort selection was held was because her face was too dark. Now this girl said that she wanted to participate in the secondary consort selection. Chapter 419. But your face. The retired emperor, who was used to giving orders, hesitated. He was satisfied with his granddaughter-in-law, Helian Vivian, from the bottom of his heart. But the imperial family was the imperial family after all. There were many things to consider, and Wei Wei's face was the key. Helian Vivian knew what the retired emperor meant. She smiled gently. "Imperial grandfather, don't worry. I will solve it myself." The retired emperor wanted to ask her how she was going to solve it. This person couldn't suddenly become white. But if Wei Wei was really chosen, she wouldn't be too bad. Then he would have an excuse to stop Aju from choosing this side consort. Okay. The retired emperor smiled. Go ahead and participate. Grandfather will help you. Even if you can't get the first place, grandfather will let you enter the top 5. As long as you enter the top 5, everything will be fine. But you must be prepared to dress up. Helian Vivian nodded. I know. The retired emperor always admired her calmness. He ordered Eunuch's son, give all the information about the side consort selection to Wei Wei later. Yes. After Eunuch's son acknowledged the order, he glanced at Helian Wei Wei again. The astonishment in his heart had yet to subside. Logically speaking, the princess consort's current appearance should not be exposed in front of everyone. She was so ugly and disgraceful. Once it was announced, it was bound to attract even more dissatisfaction. Because those people would wonder why such an ugly woman could become the third princess consort. On the contrary, they didn't get chosen because they had everything they wanted. In the past, he didn't understand that there were so many women in the world. Why did His Highness only like this person? Now that he saw so much, he finally understood. Although there were many women in the world, Helian Vivian was the only one who approached His Highness without any purpose. Even he, who had been with His Highness all year round, would feel the horror of being with a monarch was like being with a tiger because of His Highness's viciousness from time to time. But this didn't seem to exist for Helian Vivian. She just treated His Highness as a man, an ordinary man that she liked. Ever since Wang Fei entered the palace, His Highness had smiled more and more often. His doting towards Wang Fei was out of everyone's expectations. He had been in the palace for a long time and had seen many spoiled concubines. Once she was favored, she would become different from before. She would always beat and scold the palace maids and eunuchs under her. At this time, Helian Vivian was only a teenage girl, but she gave people a sense of calmness in the face of change. Don't be fooled by the fact that she usually looked lazy and didn't do anything. Every movement of hers carried a sense of oppression. He was never arrogant and was even more courteous to old people like them. Such a woman was too suitable for the dark and gloomy palace. She was different from His Highness. His Highness was the kind of person that, no matter how holy and radiant he looked on the surface, he was cold to the bone. His eyes were so cold that he could fall at any time. On the other hand, Helian Vivian clearly knew everything, but she couldn't feel any gloominess from her. She was brilliant, lazy, and tenacious, just like a warm light. Not only His Highness, but even the servants also liked to stay by Wang Fei's side. Thus Eunuch's son was really worried. He was even more anxious than Hellion Vivian, the person involved. He had to find a concubine with the best makeup skills to do Wang Fei's makeup. And clothes? Yes, that's right. He had a lot of connections in his hand, so it wasn't a problem to find a tailor. Most importantly, time was too tight. You don't know how shocked I was when he told me that he would never choose a secondary consort because you would definitely run away. The Emperor Emeritus smiled at Hellion Vivian, although I don't want to admit it, but as those people said, he is heartless and never cares about anything. Now, he finally has someone who he cares about. Even if this person becomes his weakness, grandfather is happy. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.